at 6:35. This is December 2nd. My little introduction here: as chair of the Norwich Select Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by Governor Scott as a result of COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Addendum 6 to Executive Order 01-20 and Act 92, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. In accordance with Act 92, there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the temporary amendments to the open meeting law, I confirm that we are meeting via Zoom. The public has been provided access to the meeting and a telephone number to call if they are having difficulty accessing the meeting. All public comments will be entertained. All you need to do is follow Roger's directions in just a couple minutes if you wish to speak. And all votes taken at this meeting will be roll call votes. So, having said that, and we're still not here?
No, but I'm going to try to resend the link.
Okay. I am Claudette Brochu, chair of the Select Board. We are joined by Roger Arnold, Rob Gear, John Langus, and we expect Mary Layton, our 5th Select Board member, to join us directly. We're also joined by Herb Durfee, our town manager, Miranda Bergmeyer, his administrative assistant, and multiple heads and multiple members of the public. So, Roger, it's your little intro.
Okay. Am I still here?
You are. I see you.
So sorry. Sometimes when we have multiple people signing into the account from the town of Norwich, things go a little wonky. I am the only town in Norwich today.
Join the meeting.
I see that Mary just joined us by phone. So if you would like to make a public comment, please press *9. That will raise your hand. It will signal to me that you would like to speak. I will alert the chair, and then you could push *6 to unmute yourself. I, of course, will also try to help, but sometimes it doesn't work, and you can push *6 and you can speak. So yes, so *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute.
Okay, so having that, first item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Any comment by the board? The update, we have a town manager's update later on in the meeting. I'm wondering if we could do the little briefing at that time. If that's okay with board members?
Sounds good to me.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. Mary, can you just confirm that you're here?
Yes, it's Mary Layton, and I'm in the meeting by phone.
Okay.
Any objections to what I proposed with the agenda?
Could you say it again, please, Claudette?
There is a agenda item that is a town manager's update, a verbal briefing. If we could, there had been an email circulated amongst the board, and members wanted a briefing on an issue that was raised just, I believe it was yesterday. And I was thinking to add that to the town manager's update.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other changes to or additions or deletions to the agenda, moving anything around? Okay, seeing none. Our next item is public or select board comments. Any members of the public wishing to make a public comment on anything not on the agenda? We will allow time for public comment on various agenda items at that agenda item.
So Doug Wilberding has his hand up, Claudette.
And when I call on people, please state your name and locatable address. And Doug, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Doug Wilberding, 1329 Turnpike Road. Just a quick question. Has the select board given any thought to limiting trail access during hunting season on public land?
I do not know the answer to that. And
Not since I've been here.
are you saying limiting access to the hunters or the public?
No, to the public. So there's a lot of hikers and bikers, obviously, during 2020 COVID. A lot of people are on Guile and Ballard and Blue Ribbon, hiking, biking, and running. And I'm just a little concerned about the town liability if somebody were to get injured, God forbid, shot by a hunter. There's a significant amount of hunters that were out this year. And it just occurred to me that there really doesn't appear to be any limitation to restricting access for those weeks or days when hunting season is in effect.
Thank you, Doug. We can discuss where to go with this. I'll probably reach out to conservation and see if they've given any thought to this.
Okay. One last quick thing. The Upper Valley Land Trust has written a white paper on it regarding legal liability. It's a pager. I'll shoot it over to you guys so you can see it.
That'd be great. Thank you.
It excludes municipalities are exposed, but private landowners appear to not be exposed.
Okay.
All right.
Any other public comments?
I don't see any.
Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a board member willing to make a motion on the consent agenda? Mary, go ahead.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion made by Mary, seconded by John. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll roll call. Roger,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
and Claudette's a yes. And then that brings us down to item 4, request from the fire warden for approval of a grant submission to the wildland fire equipment, for wildland fire equipment. And there was material in our document, in our packet, sorry. But I'm wondering if Linda wanted to speak to this? Or do we want to make a motion first and then have her speak? What's the board's pleasure?
I think maybe have a presentation first because we're not exactly sure of the ask, I don't think.
Okay. Linda, you're on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Fire Warden Linda Cook, 147 River Road. What this is a yearly wildland fire equipment 50/50 purchasing program. And it's coming from the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. We order in the fall and the equipment arrives in the spring. This is available for rural fire departments in Vermont to purchase fire protective gear and equipment from the catalog like you see in the packet with matching funds up to $5,000. Chief Northern, I made a recommendation of equipment suggested that we may order. Chief Northern has authorized the purchase of hoses and headlamps. The hoses are replacing hoses that are no longer in service, and the headlamps, we only have, I believe, 4 at this time, and we're going to order some more because there are many times the fire may start in daylight hours, but we may not come out of the woods until it's dark. So for a safety reason, I'd like to see headlamps on all of the trucks available. during this, so that we've got ways of coming out. I also had recommended a collapsible rake and a Pulaski. Those are two tools that are used for removing debris to create a clean path down to the ground surface to try and stop the path and spread of fire. And it's something that, you know, without officially having a budget line item or anything, it was just a suggestion, because there are times, right now we have the equipment only on the utility truck, and there are times when the fire has to be accessed from two different angles, or our department could be doing mutual aid to Fairleigh when they had their large fire up there, and it would leave us without tools. So I'm hoping we can progress and change a little bit in the future, possibly to add some more tools to the vehicles that will be responding to the wildland fire. And Claudette, you asked about buying used equipment. I don't know of any programs or avenues right now, but it's something I will look into.
I don't think I asked about used. I asked if you had the equipment already or if it was replacing.
Yes, well, we have the one rake and one Pulaski there. And what I also did is, what most of you may not be aware of is everything that goes inside a wildland fire is normally on the back of the firefighter, unless we can get four-wheelers or other equipment there to get in. So they're carrying first a hose from the truck to be a supply line toward the fire, and then on their back, they're carrying a backpack with hose in it so that they can deploy more hose and get further to try and get around the fire two ways and pinch the fire off. And once the fire is pinched, they're also working with these tools to take any hot spots and make a good, clear 3-foot ring around the entire fire to try and make sure it does not rekindle. So I did a 2-year budget and I asked for the same equipment, but it's negotiable because it depends on what our needs are. If we need gear for new people coming in because we don't have it, or taking and buying fittings or nozzles or other things, gloves that we may need. So Chief Northern has authorized the purchase of hoses and headlamps. And so we're going to move forward. It did, I think we've got a better process going forward. And in the end, it was a great team. The effort got done, and we move forward and move on now. So I thank everybody that helped in this process.
Any board questions for Linda?
So Linda, just to be clear, the request is now for the 3 headlamps and the 4 hoses. Is that what the grant submission is for? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, I think you're saying 2 hoses. Is that what you said?
I don't know what I'm saying. I'm asking. So the memo reads 4 hoses, 1 collapsible fire rake, 1 Pulaski tool, and then 3 headlamps. So it sounded like you were modifying that request.
Let me go through the list real quick here.
John?
Roger?
John, you had a,
I'm just confused as a process
Uh-huh.
point here, why we're about to go into 3 or 4 or 5 budget meetings here. Why are we talking about this independent of talking about the fire department's budget?
Because there's a deadline.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have explained that. We have to have this application into the state by the December 4th. And we had missed the process for your last select board meeting, and this was available, and it was whether or not you guys would accept it. And we are looking for 3 headlamps and 2 hoses. You may be looking at my recommended list.
and it's for this current fiscal year, John. It's not for the next fiscal year.
So, okay, so great. So the what we are this is the submission, the grant application will be for 3 headlamps and 2 hoses, not what the more extended content that's in the memo. Okay, so that's understood. And
Yeah.
so I see that Chief Northern has his hand up. So my question would then be, should Claudette allow him to answer it, would be, is there room, allowances now in the budget, this current budget, for that request? Because it's 50-50. So, and with that, I'm done on process.
So go ahead, Alex.
So what I was actually going to answer, but the question I had and the comment was actually covered by your conversation right now. So I'm withdrawing my question hand.
Can you confirm or deny maybe what I was saying?
So I have approved in writing, and I'll do it so verbally, that we have the money to pay for 2 lengths of forestry hose and 3 headlamps.
Okay, thank you.
Any further select board comments?
Should we move the motion?
Please.
Okay. I move to approve the expenditure of $455.70 from the fire station designated fund for the purchase of wildland fire gear.
So why would this be the fire station designated fund and not the fire equipment fund? The general line item, I see Herb raising his hand.
Sorry, that's a mistake on my part. I made Miranda type it up that way. It's actually coming out of the equipment tools item out of the regular budget of the fire department. So it's a regular operational item. But I thought Miranda was asking me about a repair item that is pending on your agenda for the future. So my fault on that one. So it's just out of the operational budget, Mary.
So I withdraw or amend? So, okay.
I'm not sure.
You might want to amend because the dollar value is not
Not any different.
I would just authorize the application to apply for the grant funding on a 50-50 basis, of which the local share has been actually accounted for within your AP warrant that you just approved with the consent agenda.
So moved. How about that? Basically moved by the manager.
Second.
Okay, the motion was made by Mary to apply for the wildland grant and seconded by John.
I have one more comment.
Please go ahead.
I would like the motions to be straight before we get to the meeting. I'm just saying that, okay? Thank you.
So heard. Motion made by Mary, seconded by John. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll roll call. Oh,
I
sorry.
just wanted to make sure that we're talking about $227.85.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's the match.
You're applying for a grant that's the total cost of $455.70, half of which is paid for by the town, half of which is paid for by the grant program. So as in your consent agenda AP warrant, the $227.85 is the town share.
Thank you for that clarification.
Now, any further questions?
So I don't know if Chief Northern's hand is still up, but he has hand up, and Becky. Okay, no, he says no. I'm going to lower it, and then Becky Grammer has her hand up in finance.
Go ahead, Becky.
No, I was just going to reiterate. Herb beat me to it that what's on the warrant is just over $200 for this particular grant. So it's pretty much exactly what Herb said. We submit the order for over $400. Town pays half. The grant pays the other half.
Great.
Okay, we'll vote. Roger,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So, thank you. Now we go to the independent auditors report. And Herb, do you want to tee this up?
Sure. Tonight we have Bonnie Batchelder here, representing Batchelder Associates, who's I think completed the third audit that since she's been our professional independent auditor. As is the case, I like to have the board have an opportunity to be presented the audit by the auditor, but also to have her presence to be able to answer any particular questions that you have with regard to that. The audit had been provided to you in a draft format when I gave you the budget back on October 14th. And then since then, the final audit has been forwarded off to you. So you've had a little bit of time to take a look at it from that standpoint, but I'll turn it over to Bonnie so she can generally go through her general summary and along with any management findings that she has that need to be reported. Bonnie.
Hi, everybody. So for any of you that were not here last year, this year was substantially different because we did basically the entire audit remotely, which put a little more burden on Becky and her. But I will say that, even under those circumstances, they were great. And Cynthia from NEMRIC pulling all this information together so that we could wrap this up in a timely manner. I did come on site and do a few hours of cleanup work that was just more efficient to do in the field versus off-site. But the audit is complete. The financial statements and the town's finances look great and look strong. And for those of you who were present last year, we spoke about the general fund being in a deficit position due to the FEMA monies that hadn't come in. And those, of course, came in this year, and we had talked about how the fund balance would flip itself back into a positive state, of which it has this year. The general fund is positive at a little over 860,000. So all of your fund balances, whether they're considered major funds or the smaller non-major funds, are in a positive position, which is great. You don't have any deficits in any of your town funds. So that's really good news. In comparison to what you budgeted, you were ahead by almost 1.2 million, a little under, again, due to the FEMA money coming in. But you are in a good place, and the FEMA project is behind you with any feeling that some of it wouldn't be collected. So that all ended as it should. We did have challenges with the audit due to the COVID and due to not having a finance director. But again, Becky and Herb and Cynthia really pulled together, the four of us, and we were able to pull this out of our hat here and get this taken care of for you in a timely manner. So it really went well. We, of course, have a finding this year, which I'm sure all of you expect as a result of the transactions last summer with the money being fraudulently wired out of the bank accounts and subsequent increase in financial policies. That was a subsequent event in last year's audit, but we had to address the issue this year because it was in this current fiscal year. So that is what the finding pertains to, and I'm satisfied with the financial policies that were put in place, that should prohibit that happening in the future, as long as all of those guidelines are addressed. And just a side note, as you all know, something came to light today of which Herb has briefed you on. And because of that, there's even tighter controls that he's suggesting, which I strongly recommend to be put in place or adopted in a very, very similar format, if not the format that Herb is suggesting. So you have all had the audit for a while. Does anybody have any questions of me?
John?
Thanks for your work on this, and we do appreciate the added difficulty of doing this year remotely, and appreciate it. I had a quick 2 questions. One, can you explain a little bit the note about the supplementary information concerning related to the management discussion of results here right at the beginning of the report? You talk about some additional supplementary disclosure that would be helpful. And then in addition, was there any matter during the audit where you had a disagreement as to accounting treatment for anything? And if so, how that was resolved?
No, I did not have a disagreement with anything that happened in the audit. That actually should be part of, and I think it was disclosed in the management recommendation letter, that there were no difficulties during the audit as far as disagreements. I mean, there was difficulties in gathering all the information and, you know, Becky getting up to speed because she was only working part-time and she wasn't the finance director, and not having all the knowledge necessary for that particular level of the position, but still did a fantastic job and went above and beyond on weekends and late nights and early mornings to get me what I needed. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sorry, but where are you referring to specifically in the management discussion report?
No, it refers to that discussion, but it's a note right at the beginning of the report under other matters, right at the beginning on the, let me find it again. A note from the other day. Yeah, so it's page 2. Other matters, required supplementary information.
Yeah, so that's just part of, that's the opinion letter. That's the second page of the auditor's opinion letter. And what that refers to is we have to, by regulation, by our standards, we're required to disclose the pension information, and we're required to disclose the budgetary information. Those are required supplementary disclosures. But then at the very end of the financial statements, you'll see detailed schedules of the non-major revenue funds. And those are supplementary schedules as well, but not required. So that's what that really is.
Okay, so under the other matters here in the supplementary information, you're saying that we include these things at the back of this because we're required to, but you're not forming an opinion on them because they're not part of your audit. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I mean, it is all part of the audit. It is all part of the numbers that I audited. This is a standard template that we have to go by, the opinion letter. It's, you really can't vary from it too much based on.
I'm not asking you to vary it. I'm just asking you what it says.
Yeah. So no, I mean, we audited everything. So let me just go through this.
Okay. Yeah, I think I had originally thought that you were saying that we should add some supplementary information because of this rule, but yeah, just
no, all of these
like a
items
sort of caveat to the opinion letter.
Yeah, all of these items are in your audit report and have been audited. The only thing that we don't audit, obviously we don't audit the pension. Those are disclosures that come from the state municipality firm that audits the pension plan.
Okay, that was my question.
Okay.
Any other select board questions?
I have a question.
Roger?
So on the final page, or I guess the second final page of the recommendation letter, right above restriction of use under management letter comments, can we just complete the second sentence in the third bullet? We also suggest that there is due care taken to ensure that revenue is posted separately from expenses and they are not combined, thus understanding both what the sentence just drops.
Okay, I'll fine tune that. Just basically what it means is that instead of netting your expenses against your revenue is that you state them separately. So there's a very clear delineation of what is happening, that you have money coming in for a specific purpose and money going out for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll fine tune that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, that statement that you just made was implied with that bullet point, but it's
Okay.
just not written. So thank you.
Any other select board comments? I have a question, Bonnie.
Okay.
A couple of questions. And some of them are opinion questions, just in your professional opinion.
Mhm.
What do you feel about our level of indebtedness? Is it good, too much, too little? Well, probably.
I think it's fine, honestly. The percentages really for a municipality are pretty high. It can be pretty high, the limits that they say. So what you have is very reasonable for your town.
And what would you consider to be too much?
Well, let me look at your numbers here. I mean, I would say if your debt was, I pulled the audit report all apart here, so forgive me. You have right now, you have approximately a little less than 1.7 million in debt, and you have 8.6 million in your fund balance, according to page 10. If you were a for-profit business, you'd probably look for a 12-to-1 ratio. So you're in a much better position than that. So I would say that if you had 3 million, 4 million, 50% of what your net position was, that probably would be a lot.
Okay.
Okay, because what that's saying really is that most of your debt goes to finance infrastructure, capital assets, that sort of thing, right? So if you look at page 10 and you look at the figure that says net investment in capital assets, 6,003,769. What that is that's taking your capital assets, your infrastructure of the town, less what you have for debt against it. So you're in a positive position of your assets less your debt of $6 million.
Okay.
Okay, which is a very good place to be.
And with our undesignated fund balance, what do you have an opinion about what a healthy, I know what we have said we would like to have.
Some towns say 3 months. I like to see at least 6 months of an unrestricted fund balance because, you just never know what is going to happen. And so right now your fund balance is below 6 months worth of expenses, but it's still healthy. So, I like to see 6 months.
Okay. And one final question. As a part of your audit, do you look at our financial procedures and review them?
Yes, I do. So what we do is we have a document with your controls. And then we pick a sample of your disbursements, your checks, your payroll processing, your grand list testing, your town clerk fees, things like that. And we pick a sample and we test it against what your procedures are.
Okay.
And if we have any discrepancies, then we investigate that at that time. And that's how we set the level of what our extended testing is going to be. So in other words, if we go in and we know what your internal control policies are and we pick our sample and our sample is in line with your policies, we don't find any discrepancies, we have a much higher level of confidence in the testing process. If we find a lot of discrepancies, we're going to do a lot more testing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other select board comments? Any members of the public?
Linda Cook has her hand up. She pressed *9.
Go ahead, Linda.
You can push *6, Linda.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, thank you. I have a question on page 56. There's a sentence in here that says, "We noted certain other matters that we reported to management of the town in a separate letter. There are no documents, responses included with this audit. Is there a reason this is not available to the public?"
It's part of the audit. It's the very end of the audit, and there is a management recommendation letter that went out with the audit that Roger was referring to a short time ago.
Okay, that's what that is?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Pam Smith has her hand up.
Go ahead, Pam.
Okay, Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. On page 29 is the list of all of the fund balances.
Yep.
And there are several categories, non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. I wondered if you could explain to us the difference between those different delineations of funds.
Yeah, so non-spendable, I'll kind of just group it. So non-spendable means, so that covers your prepaid expenses and your inventory. The reason it's non-spendable is because you've already spent that money, meaning you've prepaid expenses for the new fiscal year. So for a great example of that would be health insurance. You always pay usually the last 10 days of the month for the following month. So that would make that item prepaid. And inventory also are items that you've already paid. So the combination of those two items are non-spendable. The committed and assigned are say balances that the town has voted on or that the board has assigned or said they wanted to segregate this pot of money in a specific fund for a specific use. It doesn't necessarily mean that the board can't vote to change that. They can. It's not restricted by an outside source. And then unassigned is the equivalent of your unrestricted fund balance.
Anything
Okay,
else?
thank you.
Roger, you're muted.
I know, yeah. Cheryl Lindbergh has her hand up.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, Cheryl.
I'm looking at Exhibit G, which is page 16. And on that exhibit are the cemetery and the trust funds that are listed there. I was curious about the reference on the liability side of the due to other funds.
So the trustee accounts are not part of the town. They, as you know, the town doesn't control them. They have their own board and their own policymakers, so to speak. So really, there is the town doesn't track the revenue and expenses, even though the reports that I get from you has revenue and expenses on it. So instead of having a fund balance, the way all our general government does, the fund balance is really classified as due from other entities or funds, because it's really funds that are the trustee, within the trustee's discretion to be used.
Okay, because I know when for instance the general fund has the dollars of the designated funds, there's a due from set up.
Yes.
Because the money isn't really in that designated fund, it's over in the general fund bucket.
Yes.
So I was curious why the reference of due to other funds was used here, because both the cemetery and the trust funds are maintained in bank accounts separate from the general fund and the regular operations of the town.
Yeah, it's just coincidence that it's the same wording basically. And basically what you know, if you look at the general government, you have your balance sheet and then you have your revenue and your expenses. And every year your revenue and expenses are closed out into your fund balance. The trustee accounts, that's not the case. It's just money in is not, this is a statement that's being shown in the government's financial statements. So you don't want to indicate that there's revenue and expenses there because there is no revenue and expenses to the town. Whatever is in the account that's shown in the town's financial statements is due back to the trustees. That's why it's shown that way.
Okay. Okay. I just was curious about that. I haven't.
Good question.
Anything else? If not, and I'm not seeing anything from Roger, then we will move on. Thank you, Bonnie, very much.
You're welcome. Nice seeing you all again.
All right. So then we are, I have here that we're due for our first break, which it seems a little, I don't know. I'm going to ask the board, do you want to break or do you want to just go?
I think go for a while. Like, could we set a time for a break though?
After the first four, well, I actually put in 2 breaks for this because I thought it was going to be a very long meeting. So there's a second break after the finance office presentation of the budget.
Why don't we take one there, but take slightly longer? Like you have it down as a 5-minute break, but maybe take it
Okay,
as
so
a
we'll
10
just
minute.
do that as a 10-minute. Okay. All right, works for me. And I'm seeing no objections. So we're moving on to the budget discussions. And I expect a short presentation, or this is what I was envisioning, a short presentation from the department head, and then the time for questioning after that. Sound agreeable to everybody? Okay.
Sure.
Then Herb, you're up then. With the sorry, just had to chill. With the admin budget or town managers admin. Yeah.
Roger, I haven't shared my screen before. So do I just click on the share screen?
Give me 1 second. Now you can, go ahead.
So when I just click on that and then my screen will come up?
Yeah, it'll open up a little whiteboard of options. So you'll have to,
okay,
pick the one that you want us to see.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody can see the master spreadsheet for the budget?
Not yet.
Yeah,
there?
I see it. I do see it.
Oh, now I see it.
Okay. So basically, this is the master spreadsheet that I handed out to you or emailed to you on October 14 with some updates. So what I'm trying to do is keep this sheet. I purposely haven't sent it to you yet because I don't want to keep giving you iterations of the same sheet and then you get lost, especially in the Zoom world nowadays. And each particular department is going to be presenting both their operational side of the budget as well as the capital budget side of things. For purposes of tonight, I've been trying to pull everything together as fast as I could, but I did provide in a couple emails earlier tonight the status of the designated funds, as well as a little bit of graphic information and a different way of looking at the budget overall. The way you typically look at the budget is what I call by function. So in other words, it's sort of by the department and then the particular breakdowns that you have for each line item in the budget. One of the other little emails I gave you tonight is by what I call object code, which essentially takes, for instance, takes all of the salaries throughout the budget and puts it in one line item. Take all the FICA and the MEDI and put it in one line item. So it gives you an opportunity to see the budget in a much smaller COSM, but it allows you to see kind of what the general breakdown is of the budget. For instance, this is primarily a personnel-based budget. You're about 30% or so of your total budget is personnel-based, mostly under the salaries, of course, and then your bennies and the FICA MEDI come in as addition to that 30%. So that's something that I don't know if you find useful or not. If you really do find it useful, I'll add in a couple more years to the incomplete spreadsheet. But if it's not of interest to you, I'm not going to waste my time putting it together and sending it to you.
I found it useful, and also probably would want more explanation about why professional services is 15%.
Yep. So that I do have a sheet, right? I have kind of an assumption page that goes with it. So you would see each particular line item in the budget that goes into those particular categories or codes of the object. So I do have that answer for you already, Mary. I just wanted to see if there was interest in getting a couple past years worth of information as well, so you could see where there might be patterns of change. So I'll complete that table and then get the justification for each of those lines to you. So overall, you know that I've given you a budget that's pretty darn high. The idea is that that's not a town manager recommend at this point, but it's an opportunity to have some discussion with the select board in fine tuning what ultimately would be the proposed budget that goes to the town voters. And there are some decisions clearly that you would normally make throughout the process. What I'm going to go through in this before I turn it over to particular department heads is just highlight a number of them to show you that there is room for change. And whether there's room for not or change, I know you're going to make change. So so where you see the items that are pink, or if it looks pink on your screen, some kind of a rose color, these are items that I'm just going to highlight quickly as I go down through. And I will, as I go through, Madam Chair, I will hit the things that I'm responsible for up to the finance office. But I am going to go past the finance office, at least with the pink related stuff, so that you guys just get a general sense, given a 20% increase in a budget, where there's some stuff that I already have some information to provide for you. So I'm going to go a little bit off center of your agenda, but I'll come back and go through the other things up through finance that I'm responsible for, and then I'll turn it over to the department heads that are responsible for the other items that are on your agenda. So the first one up there is town manager wage. During the past year, you opted not to give me a step increase. I assume that also did not include a CPI increase, so I did not have that given to me. However, this number here is if you had done the normal step increase with my longevity time here. The reason why I kept it in there like that is to give you the choice of, if you opt not to renew my contract later on this year, that at least there is a budgeted amount that if it was necessary to have somebody at a higher rate, you would have that rate. Or obviously, or you can backfill it, or not backfill it, but cut it back down to what I'm actually making with or without a step increase. Under the professional services, just wanted to highlight this particular line item here. I think given legal expenses in the past year and some that we've used this year, that still is going to be a relatively used item by the town and would be relatively high. However, the number here still includes the third of the 3 years of the payback of the Church Street school to work amount. So basically next year, this will be reduced by about $23,000. But right now, that number, I would suggest that you not tinker with, just because of the expenses that you're dealing with professionally, mostly under the umbrella of legal, but that's why that number is fairly high.
Could you stop a minute there, please?
Sure.
On your operating budget by object, under professional services, it says $815,306. So how does that reconcile with this line item? Like, are there other areas of the budget?
Correct.
For instance, engineering or something like that? Is that where the rest of it tends to be?
This is one of the line items, one of the individual line items that falls into that by object code categorization on the other spreadsheet that I sent earlier tonight. There are many other line items that essentially are a form of professional services, such as the contract assessor under the listers, some of the contract services under the Department of Public Works budget, and obviously in some other areas of the budget. So when I give you the assumption page that goes with that, you'll see every single individual line item that's included in that overall professional contract related services in the object code table.
I'm finding this really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary, can I just ask one thing though?
Not to interrupt.
No, not, that wasn't going to be my ask. My ask was going to be, since the public hasn't seen that by object list, and I haven't had an opportunity to look at that by object list. I don't know what you're really talking about.
Okay.
So,
but I'm hoping that perhaps by tomorrow's meeting or a subsequent meeting, I found that a lot of the materials come very last minute, and I have almost no time to look at them. I just happen to look at that particular one, and I find it useful. So I'm hoping we can get caught up with everything that's been sent. But it also, I think, would inform our conversation about the budget. So it's a little bit, I understand what you mean about the public not seeing it, but I think it should be included, but I don't know how to get it all caught up to all of us being able to see it and also the public. But I think you have a very good point.
it won't be available probably for everybody until the 9th.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
it is, I don't know. I just find that number really big, that category is really large. I mean, Herb, you don't have it where you could show it at some point, not maybe tonight or maybe tomorrow night or something? Is there a way for you to share it other than that
It's on the screen right now.
Yeah. Is that helpful, Claudette?
Yeah, it is actually.
Except that you don't really have too much time to study it, but
Right.
you can kind of see what jumps out.
Okay.
Right. So essentially, just while it is up there, this will be, what I plan to do is put a couple more years in there. But what I've done is, as the budget currently is before you, I've put in everything with regard to the categories. This is where I had said earlier, here's the salary line item where it's almost 31% just in salary and wages alone of the total budget. And that's not including the other monetary articles that are voted. So this is just the operational budget. And then you have overtime, FICA, Medi, health insurance, disability, life, dental, retirement, that all here make up essentially your personnel. So that's 31, 2, 3, 4, 40, probably about 41 or 42% of your total budget is personnel based rooted with salaries and benefits.
Okay, so Claudette, we have 2 hands up now from the public. So I'm just letting you know. Do you want to hold them to the end, or I mean?
Yes, I would want to wait till the end for public.
Okay.
So hold your thoughts, people. Write them down.
Again, like this table, as much as I just sent it to the select board, the idea is to finish it and it would be available. It will be given to the folks so they can see it publicly in a future packet, and probably for the regular meeting next week. But I did want to get information to the select board as soon as I was trying to complete information for tonight. So going down to finance officer wage and finance assistant wage. Again, the amount that's in here for the finance officer wage is quite an increase. from when we last had a finance director. This is with regard to trying to get a finance director on board. We've tried 5 different advertising campaigns to get a finance director on board. The board indicated to me at a meeting or two ago, asking me what was needed. Part of it was having the amount of the salary raised for that particular person to make it more attractive. I think that and there has been an offer made to an individual that is in the middle of reviewing the offer. So hopefully, by the end of the week, I'll have a yes or a no. So hopefully, we'll have good input from that. Basically, this person would be hired in step on the grade that they're at. And then the finance assistant wage, this is much higher because you have agreed to convert the half-time position into a full-time position. That has related fall through with regard to the increases in all the personnel base with regard to benefits and FICA, Medi, et cetera. The other pink part here is the health insurance. This is a situation where I have budgeted for 2 people, and I can tell you that one of the people is not participating in the health program that we offer. So there is an opportunity for savings here if you wish to do that. There is also an assumption for the position in terms of it being filled, and budgeting something. Technically, you're on the hook for a person that would take a family plan at the platinum level. What I have budgeted for the finance officer at this point that you see in here is a gold standard family plan in trying to budget something. But there is a little wiggle room there if you want to assume that the current person that is not participating in the program, 1, is not going to go to a new job, and 2, is not going to drop dead today. So if something like that did happen and somebody else came on board, again, your risk is that you need to offer this particular benefit. So you can reduce this line item, and I'm happy to work with you on that. But right now, this is anticipating a budget rather than the actual of what's a possibility here. Under the general administration, the server maintenance and designated fund equipment, the 2 numbers here are the assumption that we would be moving forward with carrying out the implementation of the upgrade to the server and the computers throughout Tracy Hall, as well as some of the licenses, peripherals, and software. And this is directly, these are the numbers that are directly from the report that was provided to us from SimQuest's assessment. So again, based on your decisions to move forward with something or not, there is flexibility in this line or these lines. This is kind of the highlight there. As you're well aware, the designated fund, even as Manu showed you the pivot table at your last meeting, one of the major increases throughout the budget are the new appropriations for designated funds. This is a good example where the listers have suggested, because we anticipate a reappraisal coming up in the not too distant future, an increased amount that would go into the reappraisal reserve fund. Under the designated funds for the tennis court under recreation, to me, this is an increase and significant increase in terms of percentages, but is paltry with regard to the amount of money that's needed in order to fix the tennis courts. The tennis courts are in woeful condition. They are at this point in need of an entire redo. It's not just a patch anymore. We're basically, when we get into the capital budget, we're looking at probably at a maximum of about $150,000 to repair the tennis courts. We are working to try to have a donation program set up to be an offset, 50% offset of a tennis. There's a tennis grant that's available out there on a 50-50 basis. We are trying to apply for that grant, and then also have the local share of 50% paid for by donation. But again, not knowing where we're at with regard to that, we're still trying to build up that reserve for the tennis court and its replacement. I don't like to highlight individual persons' wages, but I am going to in this particular instance. The police chief's wage, I am trying to increase this. And in the compensation spreadsheet that I gave you earlier, you can see the amount that I'm trying to get at, basically over a 2-year period of phase-in. But what I'm trying to do is get your permission to increase the police chief's wage into a step higher than in which she's making right now, not a grade increase, but step increase. The main reason why this is occurring is that there are a number of hours that the chief is working that is unacceptable in my mind without being paid the appropriate compensation, or at least part of the appropriate compensation. Her current salary is such that the least paid hourly wage police officer in town on average makes more than she does on any given payroll time frame. That's unacceptable in my mind. And that's a function because of the union contract with overtime, on-call time, call-in pay, regular wages, etc. And I do think that even though the police chief is salaried, she well understands that there are times when an officer that has to go above and beyond to do some extra overtime is going to be making more than she's going to, but this should not be a regular occurrence. And then the little note here that says, why so high? In a previous year, there showed a higher amount for the police chief that was about $105,000. That related to when Doug Robinson left. He had a payout of his remaining vacation. So there was, that normally comes out of the police chief wage. So that's why there's a little bump in a previous year. So that's why that question is there. Just highlighting a couple areas, dispatch services, not only for police, but fire and the ambulance. This is an actual amount that you have to deal with. This is what's handed to us by Hartford Dispatch. I think this is the 3rd or the 4th year of their major increases from when they updated their dispatch center. So that's unfortunately an actual number you have to deal with. I do know that the police chief can talk about that should you wish, which might even include, as we discussed a couple of years ago, do we need to start thinking about other dispatch centers for our police department? And there hasn't been any recent stuff done, but I do know that we've at least explored that opportunity. Here's the dispatch service for the fire, the dispatch service right here for the ambulance contract. Right now, those numbers in there are put in there as level fund, but I don't have updated figures for you yet with regard to those two. I assume that they will be higher than that. Hydrant rental, this one is most disturbing to me. This is the amount of money that we pay the fire district for the use of for the fire department's use of the fire district's water. And it's reasonable to pay something. If you look at some, I don't want to go backward in previous years because the board columns are in there and you're not going to see it all on the screen, but that basically they're doing a 48% jump on us this year. I'm disturbed only because the formula that was used in the past is based on some sidewalk discussions in the past. We realized that we were underpaying what we should have. We put in the new amounts based on that past agreed formula. It's apparent that that older formula is not suiting the needs of the fire district, and therefore they are trying to phase in an update to the way that water usage is calculated, specifically not only just probably for other things, but also for the hydrant rental. So this is the first phase of probably a two-step jump. And I think that is excessive. More, again, just highlighting some more of the designated fund increases. The fire department, when they get into their into their presentation, they'll describe why they're looking for increases in designated funds for both their apparatus, which are their vehicles, as well as the equipment. You can see I've already jumped it down a little bit, but they will try to argue the 70 and the 30 amount here for the rationale of the spreadsheet that they have for that. But I'll let them argue that point. Road crew overtime, I just want to highlight this in that that's one of those sort of flexible line items. The last couple years, we've had winters that have started in October and held on pretty deep into the winter season, where we've had some pretty significant overtime. So this is trying to raise that overtime amount to be a little bit more in keeping with what we've experienced over the last couple fiscal years. Hopefully, you may be able to play with this. I continue to knock on wood every single day of the week that I don't see snow flying outside. So the longer winter holds out without having big, huge dumps, we will get back to what I would call maybe a more normal overtime amount of expenditure. But again, this is a line item that I would just draw your attention to decide whether you want to lower this back to more trend type years, meaning years prior to the past 2 years, winters, or do we want to budget something that's more in keeping with the last couple of years? Paving grant, this line item here is flexible. The likelihood of getting a paving grant in the next year is probably pretty slim. We would need to rely on some fairly good luck if we were going to get a paving grant, because we were just granted a paving grant we finished it up the last fiscal year, so it was just within the last couple of years. The offset to that is that we need some paving funds. We've now used our paving funds considerably over the last couple of years. We were offset nicely with a paving grant that couple of years ago, but we're now getting to the point where we need to replenish that designated fund, because we're almost now back to a situation which is prior to the Marcon report that suggested, it was about $225,000 a year to go in, that where you did your paving based on an operational need every single year. We're almost back to that situation where we don't have the designated funds. In other words, that we would need to annually budget something just to do the actual project that we want to do. Bridges is highlighted here because of the capital budget and the number of bridges that we're dealing with and their repair. So there is a fairly large increase that has been proposed by the Director of Public Works. You can see I've already reduced that considerably, but it still is high compared to past years. Designated fund for Tracy Hall, simply highlighting that in the interests of I think we need to pull together some direction again with regard to Tracy Hall in terms of what we're going to do with it with regard to fossil fuel reduction, and also that the building is getting older, and that I believe that we need to continue putting money into the designated fund to handle Tracy Hall and its anticipated changes in the future. Just highlighting a couple debt service expenditures that are new. This is the Brown Schoolhouse Road pedestrian bridge. It's $14,000 a year for 5 years. The first payment for that 5 years will be this coming fiscal year, beginning July 1. The public safety building highway garage, based on the town meeting last year that approved the overage loan. Here's the it's in the budget this year for the first time, even though you've already made the first payment on that. This is the first opportunity we've had to budget for it. Property and casualty insurance, those just came in today, so I'm highlighting those. Those things that are in green are confirmed as numbers. So property and casualty insurance is actually going up about 16%. The main reason for that is that this is the first year that the public safety building and the highway garage addition are actually included in the calculation for property related insurance. And then on the other side of the coin, which is actually pretty good, it seems like our workers' comp insurance is going down even some more from what we had budgeted last year. This is because a number of the longer term injuries that had been on our books have started to come off the books. Also, because we have had somewhat fewer workplace related injuries, our experience modification has continued to go down. Our latest experience modification is 1.2, which is still higher than what we want to have. One is the experience modification of 1 is the equivalent of all the workplace injuries together and what the average is for all of that. So we're still above the average for the rolling average that they have every single year. But that has come down, I think, from about 1.4 or higher over the last couple of years. So I think that's credit to the department heads and my office working with employees on trying to have safety related stuff and not sticking fingers in feet where they're not supposed to go. So that's a good sign from that standpoint. So those are sort of some general pink highlights that are what I'm getting at. Going back to the town administration, I think overall this budget is the town administration overall is reflective of a fairly level fund, short of the couple different little things that have gone up. The town report as a highlight has gone down considerably. That's related to the fact that we used to make a town report for everybody in town and mail it to them. And with the kindness of the town voters, they've agreed that we will be doing, as we've been doing the last couple of years, we just print a certain few and let people know by postcard that they're available and people can pick them up. If someone really needs it mailed to them, it can be mailed to them. But the nice thing is, based on the last couple of years, we have a better idea of who really wants a copy. And so we've actually reduced the number of the printing costs down to about $2,500. The Energy Committee, I don't know if the Energy Committee members are here, but their budget is basically level fund from the current year. So there's not much to talk about from that standpoint. They did do a couple little changes in between their budget, but I think that's a fairly reasonable budget with regard to what they do. They do a considerable amount of work throughout the town, and I think they do it on the cheap, but they have a lot of effectiveness with regard to the budget. And then under committee, this is essentially what I call a new item, even though that line item has consisted for a while. This is trying to take under consideration that we have a finance committee, we have a child care committee, we have a solid waste committee, an audit committee, that there may be some needs out there from those particular committees, which we don't have budgets for them, but I've tried to, and you'll see in the justification sheet that I made for this, the breakdown for that in terms of having some level of funding available to those committees if they have some level of expenditure. So that's really the major change as it relates to overall town administration, besides the impact of the salaries and the related benefits. The town, I don't know if Bonnie's here to do town clerk, but I'll jump to the finance since I still have the floor. Under the finance department, I've already highlighted the wage situation, the healthcare situation. Beyond that, it's essentially a level fund budget. The only difference is that with regard to the independent audit, I've increased that slightly because this would, I think that we are now out. The next audit that we have to do is beyond our 3-year commitment with Batchelder Associates. That is a discussion that I would like to have with the board at a future agenda item is, would you like the town manager to go out to bid again for auditing, or would you like to allow me to continue with a sole source contract for at least another year? I'm assuming you would allow a sole source, given that Bonnie has been doing this now for a couple of years, or for 3 fiscal years, that it might make sense to retain her for another year or two, and then thereafter go out to bid. which even Bonnie Batchelder has indicated to me that it's good after at least the 5-year period of time to go back out to bid again for an independent auditor. So this amount here is simply putting in an increased factor, given that we don't have a future contract at this point. Since no one else is part of it, this is the general administration. I've already mentioned what the big line items are, which is the assumption right now that we would be doing the upgrades to our computer system. So from that standpoint, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to entertain questions or make any clarifications that you need on whatever I've chatted about.
I'm going to go to Select Board first, and I know there is still some public wanting to comment, but any questions from Select Board members for Herb?
I have a question, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Roger.
So Herb, I'm trying to understand the how you were using the document that you walked us through. So the items are in pink. So in some cases they have sort of you working through a line item where you're proposing decreases, and then in some instances they're just highlighted. And so I suppose this is like part of a transparent process where you need some feedback for us before you're able to work towards that sort of town manager recommended budget, or is it not? Like, how are we supposed to be looking? You called our attention to these items in pink and walked us through it, but what is the analysis you would like from us on that?
Right, so so just first of all, the color coordination, the pink is really kind of a highlight for me tonight to identify a number of different line items. Some of those are set in concrete and you can't touch them. Others, I've indicated that there's a level of flexibility, but I wanted those were basically some of the highlights that I wanted to go through. The green items are those are confirmed numbers. So as for instance, the Vermont League of Cities and Town membership, that's what it's going to be for next year. Okay. And that's more what I usually do is when I go through, sorry, I'm going down to the other monetary articles.
Okay.
So as I receive the other monetary articles, their petitions or what have you, I color code them just so I'll know whether I have them or not in terms of confirming that. So that's what that's about. Things that are yellow are still things that I have questions on that I think that either I don't have the final number, as for instance here for the unemployment insurance rate, but I'm pretty confident that there's not going to be a substantial increase in that. Really what I did is I rounded it to the closest $100 more or less to what we experienced from the actual for fiscal year 20. Here's a good example of a yellow with a question mark. This was the regional energy coordinator. That was a 1-year authorization that the board did. Through various circumstances, we opted not this year to participate in that program. So there's $30,000 that's been raised through taxes that essentially will be in the undesignated fund balance when all is said and done. So the question would be, do you wish to, I think if you're going to continue to think about the regional energy coordinator, you already have $30,000 for a coming year that you could utilize for that specific purpose, because this was voter authorized, so it has to be for that specific purpose.
Great.
If you're going to have any other discussion with regard to the regional energy coordinator, I don't know if you want to raise additional funds with the idea of going past 1 fiscal year worth of stuff. So the yellow has those kinds of questions that pop up that still need some answer. Where I'm coming from with regard to the overall budget and not yet being town manager is, as I mentioned when I handed out the budget, I think that we're at a crossroad, and I won't say precipice this time, Mary, so that I can get my brain straight from stuff. But I think we're at a crossroad. So what I want to get some feedback on from the board is if you want to have a budget that is similar to what we've been doing for historically, which is I get you the lowest budget that I think I possibly can. You have some particular stuff, and we're somewhere, so to speak, in that, the normal 3%, 4% increase. I can go back and do that if you want that. But to me, that is more sticking to the guns of sort of that austerity budget that we've been at. So the one of the charts that I sent you earlier tonight, again, which will be made available to the public in the future, shows the trends. Obviously, it shows the trend dramatically upward when we get to the proposed budget for this year. But if you look at when it goes back to, we've basically been sort of keeping the same sort of budget over quite a few number of years. And I'm getting nervous as a result that the cost, the personnel cost, again, it's a personnel-based budget. Those costs are continuing to go up either by the CPI or as in the union contract or as otherwise what our normal pay schedule shows, along with health insurance and all that, which are givens. Those are sort of like handed to you as a ball of wax that you really can't touch. So if we're going to stick to kind of the way that we've done the trend analysis, the nervousness that I have is that we're going to cut things, discretionary line items that we're going to cut that are going to affect services. We'll still have our personnel and those increases will increase, but effectively what you're doing is you're tightening and reducing the overall other items of the budget that are non-personnel based. The clear thing with regard to, so that's one aspect of how I want to have this looked at, Roger, is to basically say, I can put forward that kind of budget. If you really want that, just tell me, I'll go back, revise it, probably fairly quickly, because that would be, for the most part, an easy thing. But what that does is, what I'm asking for you as well is trying to work in tandem with the capital budget that's been provided to you to say, here are the things that are coming up in the future, the next 5, 6, 7 years that will cost something. And in many instances, a lot of those costs rely on the designated funds to pay for those things. A good example is fire apparatus. There is, from the fire department's perspective, there is a need to replace one of their major pieces of their vehicle apparatus. They would like to be able to pay for that entirely by designated funds without going out for any form of borrowing. And to get there are certain needs up front to fund the designated funds to get to that standpoint. The idea probably being, and they'll make their own presentation, but the idea is that we're going to be collecting on interest and paying for something that we've budgeted for, rather than having another form of borrowing where you're going to make principal payments and interest payments, which is more costly to the town in the long run. So yeah. So the idea is that there's the preponderance of the budget increase relates to the designated funds and their increases as it's juxtaposed with a capital budget and program that's given to you.
Okay.
My only question, Herb, was just, I understand that, and I think you've made your case and we'll discuss it, but green, so green is like you have a set number, it's unconfirmed. Yellow is a moving target, and pink is just things that are flagged and possibly of further discussion. Okay.
That was me flagging for tonight's discussion.
Okay.
So again, it was just giving you some highlights of certain things where
Bonnie, Monday.
Where I thought
Join the meeting.
I thought things were helpful. But that, when I give you the next updated spreadsheet, you're not going to see you won't see the pink on there. You'll probably still see the yellow and the green, or even more green, because as I get final numbers in, I'll increase the green. Eventually, all the color goes away.
Okay. Any further board questions?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mary.
In one of your supplemental emails, Herb, you had quite a good, I thought, helpful graph that seemed to be expressing some of the ideas that you just were relating. For instance, it looked as though for a period, and it probably coincided with having to deal with the July 17th storm, that we underfunded our designated funds. Would you be willing to find that and just put that up as a general kind of a global snapshot of what we've been going through? It was in one of the emails that you might even sent out today. I thought it was quite a helpful graph.
This one
It was actually it was a graph.
for, oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it was the designated fund one. There was a third one.
Yeah.
We could figure out what it is. It might have been operational cost versus, where is it?
Yeah. So
Operational cost versus designated and debt.
right. So this doesn't have the, well, I had a 5-year rolling average of what it had occurred with regard to how the percentage change has occurred with regard to the operations. But this is the table that I have. I know you can't all see it, but so it's operations separated from designated funds, separated from debt service, obviously separated from monetary articles. And I've done this back to 2010. So you can see the operations. Here's the percent change in operations. And I know that sometimes the picture of people interferes with that, but you can kind of see how things have occurred with regard to operations. I haven't quite done the percentage yet on the change there. And then what I try to do is a rolling average just to grab a sense of it. For the
Farther down.
designated funds, the percent change, you've kind of gone down for a couple of years, and then when the July 1 storm hit in that budget year, you actually decreased the amount of designated funds from what was around $600,000 a year total to about just under 300,000.
Yeah,
And-
that dip, those two dips were problematic. You've got a graph of that somewhere. It might be in this one farther down.
Oh
That
yeah,
one.
there we go.
This
Sorry,
one.
yes, I meant to
Yeah.
have this
I just
for you
thought this is
today.
good, kind of a global view of things,
Mhm.
but especially those three bottom lines.
Yep.
To me, were very helpful.
Mhm.
Just to see that dip, that it was kind of low, it went up, it plateaued, and then with the storm, we're freaking out about how to pay it. So we underpaid a lot of our designated funds. Meanwhile, all those personnel costs are always going up. So, and then we're talking about paying people a little more to get high quality people. So you can kind of see exactly what you were talking about in your picture here.
Right, and then again, so that if people can't see, the green is kind of the operational budget. And I just have for each year, I had for the last couple of years, had some information that essentially I went over earlier in a number of my things. But the CPI increase was 1.8 a couple years ago. Last year, it's 1.46. And this year, right now, I'm estimating the CPI to be about 1.75. I won't have that CPI number for you until this time next month when the November number comes out, and then I'll be able to calculate the CPI. But right now, the 1.75 is the average of the most recent 4 years without the 5th year in it. So it's only a 4-year rolling average right now. The blue here, the designated funds, here's definitely that dip that we saw for the last couple of years. You brought it up a little bit last year from that standpoint. And then of course, this year, the big major jump right there is as it's proposed, as it relates to the capital projects being proposed. For the debt service is kind of been about the same, but it jumps up just a little bit because of the Brown Schoolhouse, as well as the overage for the 2 building additions. And then the monetary articles is the orange. That's gone down a little bit, essentially because the library doesn't have, they made for 1 year a $50,000 capital request, which was approved, and then that's gone back down. So you're sort of back to where you were prior to that jump.
Did you have any other question, Mary?
No, thank you.
Any other board questions? Roger, you'll have to cue me in if there are any.
None that they're indicating via Zoom tools.
Okay, and then we still have a couple of public comments or
Yeah.
public questions.
Pam Smith and Linda.
Jeremy, Claudette? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Linda, yeah, I think Pam had a question before you.
Okay, no problem.
Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you. Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. I'm also the vice chair of the Finance Committee. Because Manny is attending the school board meeting tonight, I have a request.
Hey, Pam, sorry to cut you off. I'm actually here today.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, Manny, I'd like to proceed anyway, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, of course. I just want you to know I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm here
Herb
too.
has presented a lot of information to the select board that hasn't been shared with the finance committee. And so my request is that as these things go out to the select board, could they also come to the finance committee so that it helps us in our evaluation of the budget, which is ongoing.
A lot of the stuff we've just gotten today, Pam, so, but
Well,
yes,
it would
they
have
will
been
come
nice
through.
if we'd been on that copy list is what I'm getting at.
The
And
chair-
then
the chair of the finance committee was copied on that. I leave it to the chair to distribute it to the committee members.
Okay, thank you. One of those documents that I saw was projection of designated fund balances out through June 30 of 2021. And is that one of the documents you sent him?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll ask him to get that to me. And then the last thing is going back to the comment that was made by the auditor. Just wanted to say that I hope when future articles are presented to the voters for their consideration, that we keep her comment about maximum debt load in mind. We need to learn how to live within our means. So just wanted to highlight Bonnie's comment about the amount of debt that would concern her. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And I think Linda, Roger, is Linda next?
That's right.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, one of the questions is a follow-up with her talking about the police department and the salary versus overtime hours. I know with people out with injury or other whatever in the department, I understand that, but there's also consideration when I was on the board before, when the police chief or planning director filled in for the town manager, there was a compensation there. Is that something we are doing or not doing?
That I would leave to Herb. I don't know.
So one, the town manager is still here, so there's no need to fill in anybody there from that standpoint. Maybe that's a future consideration. But with regard to the police chief, what's happening in the instance of the police chief is that on a regular basis than the exception, even the lowest hourly waged police officers on average are making more than the police chief is on a regular basis. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the police chief is a salaried employee rather than an hourly wage employee. So as we've been down a number of officers, frankly, I think the chief, sorry, I didn't mean Frank there, but the chief has only had a full complement of officers for the first week of serving as the police chief. Every other situation has been at least one officer down in some situation or another for the last 2 years. So she's ended up putting in an inordinate amount of hours, still with a given salary that she has. The other officers have made up other times as well, but by contract, they get overtime, call-in pay, call-out pay, and a lot of other stuff. So the adjustment that I'm trying to make is a fairer wage for the salaried police chief, if that's what your question is, Linda.
Well, just a follow up, if I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just knew that we had increased, especially like Phil's salary because of it. But you're saying what you're doing is basically covering? Like if you took a 2-week vacation and this person's going in, doesn't matter what position, and covering, you know, payroll and things like that, are they being compensated? It doesn't matter if it's Jen, Phil, Doug. I'm just trying to figure out if there is some type of compensation there, which you said there is in some way that you're working on.
No, there's normal compensation for the officers that are hourly, that are filling hours that when they're an officer down, we have to maintain the coverage. So there are officers that are hourly wages that are getting paid to do that coverage. In addition to those officers, the police chief is covering additional time to do that, but she's a salaried employee, so she gets no additional compensation according to our personnel policies because she's a salaried person. She can take some additional time off should she choose to have some comp time, but she can't even find the time to take time off. So what I'm trying to do is to essentially, for lack of a better term, renegotiate with the select board the ability to move the police chief into a higher step than she's currently at.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a function of filling in for somebody else. It's a function of raising her salary.
And the chief sent a chat, and just to share the chat because I hate the chat, but anyway, because people can't always see it. This is from Chief Frank. The chief considers the fill-in role to be part of her duties as assigned and is not seeking any additional funding or monies for her services as acting TM when called on. So, okay.
I don't know if I could follow up.
Only if it is very brief.
Nope, I understand what you're saying, but I think, and like I said, it doesn't matter any position where somebody's doing above and beyond. If there's a way to compensate, and if the step increase brings that in, I think it's great. But I just think we should acknowledge that sometimes you're expected to do more than what you're really trying to fill in for, and that may come in a policy change later. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then I'm moving us on. Thank you, Herb. Our next.
Should we do our break? Now that was a big, long run there.
Please.
Were we going to do it after the town clerk, though? Has she had a chance?
I don't know. We were going to do it before, but then we didn't. Yeah, that was a really long one. I think everything after this is going to be quite a bit shorter with each one.
I'm happy to take a break now. If any objections by the board?
I might need to if everyone else doesn't.
Might need to what?
Yes, I'm all for a break.
Okay. So it's 8:13. We will reconvene at 8:23.
Okay.
8:23. Reconvening the Norwich Select Board meeting for December 2nd. And I think we've left off. Bonnie, are you here?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Okay. So we do have all members of the select board back, as well as our town manager, and I'm assuming Miranda is also there. Well, she's on our screen anyway. So Bonnie, it's your turn.
Okay. Really, my budget hasn't changed much. In some areas, it may have gone down a little bit. In some other areas, it may have increased, but overall, I don't believe I've increased all that much. Does anyone have any questions?
Any select board questions?
Is there an area, Bonnie, where you wish it could have gone up? I seem to remember last, but yeah, I mean, do you feel like I know that you're very cognizant of our taxpayer dollars, our public money, but I seem to remember an incident, and correct me if I'm wrong, last year where we thought, like, for the preservation of the records for the designated funds that you would gladly have taken more to finish the project, for example. I'm paraphrasing poorly. So is there anything like that where if you weren't so thoughtful in your history with Norwich and what would what would be your dream? I'm going to ask this to everyone.
Well, there actually is possibly two areas that I would consider actually the designated funds for restorations always. But I think in the future, it would be nice if I could have a laptop which would be utilized. I would be able to take it with me upstairs to the polling place so that I could access some of the election material. The state website, rather than run up and downstairs to go on my computer downstairs. It would pretty much be dedicated solely to elections, and it would stay in the building. It's not something that I would tote around for any other purpose.
Okay, thank you for
that is about the only area that I honestly can think of where I would spend more money. Everything else I think is pretty standard for what an office would need to run.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Apologies for my phrasing of that question for that.
No. I'm not that sensitive, Roger. Board of Civil Authority, that pretty much is going to stay status quo. That's mainly based around tax appeals and abatements. Statutory meetings is what it is. It's primarily to run our elections. And then the town clerk is my office. And the nice thing is, too, is I've statutorily have been able now to take money from recordings and put it in with restorations. They designate $4 of every page to go towards records restorations or things that can be used in the vault.
Any other select board questions?
I have one more question, but I know that this is, we have a long night. But one question I've been wondering with the records restoration, Bonnie, is that could that be a process where if someone were to authorize, like, let's say a big pool of money for an abbreviated period of time to finish all of that work, would that be could that be a vision? Or do you sort of recommend this more of the incremental approach that you've sort of proposed?
The biggest job in my vault right now will be, and I put this off because it is such a big chunk of change, is restoring the old grand lists. I have a estimate that goes back a few years where the bulk of the restoration funds would be towards restoring those. To do the grand lists, it's almost $200,000 in itself. So I'm not sure how to approach that incrementally.
Wow.
Or as a whole. And what I have been doing, they aren't touched very often. So I've been focusing on the books and things that are more inclined to be used. But that's going to be huge. when it comes time to undertake those restorations. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any public questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Bonnie. Sorry to keep you
Thank
up
you.
late.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Herb, I don't know if there's more to the finance office or if you've covered it all.
No, I covered it when I went. I was trying to save the switching around of people. And while I just have the floor, Madam Chair, do you want my screen shared to have the budget up on the screen while the presentations are going on? Or not?
I say no, but that's just me.
Yeah, I was just asking.
I have to step aside just for a second. I gotta sneeze.
Do my vice chair duties cover sneezes, Claudette? Or should I know?
Go ahead, Roger. Take the lead.
Okay, oh gosh. Okay. So I think if Bonnie is all set, then we should move on to the next department on the list, right? No one has any more questions for Bonnie? Okay. Oh, Claudette's back, good.
Oh, sorry.
The next department on the list.
You were doing well. So moving on. It's the Board of Listers. And Cheryl, your turn.
Cheryl Lindberg. And the other two listers are here in case I forget something. I just would like to look over the columns with what we had proposed. One thing that I was going to ask Herb about, or we wanted to ask Herb about, was the assessing clerk wage, or the admin clerk, as we prefer to refer to the position. We had 17.7 in this current budget, and not knowing that Masaki was going to find a different job, and kudos to her, we had budgeted 18,000 for that line item. So we were wondering how Herb came up with the 20,467.
So in the email that I sent you earlier, basically what it is based on the pay schedule that we have, which is I can't remember which grade and that position is in off the top of my head, but basically it was that grade at step A, which is the first step. So when you calculate it out for 20 hours a week, that's the amount that you have. So basically you were putting in an amount that's less than what's on the pay schedule.
So we had never had a 20-hour-a-week person. We were more targeting 17 to 17 and a half hours a week. And so when we did our calculation, we thought 18,000 was going to be sufficient, and certainly a new hire, which by the way, we're starting that process right now. We wouldn't bring the person in at what somebody else left at. We would bring the person in at a step that makes sense for a beginning person on a probationary period, and then hopefully provide an increase after the probationary period. So again, just wanted you to know where we were at and why we had 18,000 in our budget. So that's one thing I would tell the board.
So if I can interrupt, Cheryl,
yeah.
I can recalculate that. So I've calculated it at 20 hours a week. If it's 17, I'll redo it. But it'll be at whatever the normal grade is that person's at step A, which is the lowest rate. If you want me to do it for 17 hours, I'll do it for 17 hours. It's calculated right now at 20 hours.
Yeah. Well, again, it may be that's the kind of hourly.
Not at Masaki's rate. Masaki's at step D.
Yeah.
So it is less than it's back to where the entry level would be.
Yeah, and it may be more attractive. I think that was the word I was thinking, to hire for 20 hours a week than 17 and a half. But, it worked before. So we were trying to think about that. there are times when we need the person full-time during those hectic, busy times with the grand list and grievances and all, but it still seemed to work out okay. Not being an employee with benefits, when they choose to take a week off, it's an unpaid week. So it worked out overall for us. Again, we're happy to work.
I'm so sorry, Cheryl. I know I don't mean to interrupt. I know this is your presentation, but respectfully, are we brainstorming the line item right now? What is it that you're asking us to consider? This is very frustrating for me. I'm sorry. So what is the request? What are you presenting to us?
Well, I was presenting the budget for the listers department and was telling you as the board where we were focusing our dollars. And the only things that have changed since we put our budget together is that line item, which brings our budget down, if we put in what we had, to an amount that makes it look a little more like a flat budget, and which is where we wanted to focus any extra dollars was into the reappraisal fund. So that was why I was ducking. I didn't put the 20,000. We didn't put the 20,467 in our budget. So I was questioning how that got there. And with that, everything else looks to be how we proposed it, and the increase dollars into the reappraisal fund. I can go over that, but I think it's pretty clear to people what's going on in Vermont right now with house sales and the dollars being paid. And we dropped 4 percentage points last year on our CLA. The listers totally expect another drop of that amount. We'll be closer to 90. And we will have to have a reappraisal at 85 for the CLA, and that we need to start, putting more into the reappraisal fund. So we're shifting dollars. That's our sort of point.
Okay. John, you had a question?
Yeah, what's the fund right now going into this budget for the reappraisal?
Well, I wrote that in my notes. I'm sorry, John. I think if we put this 43 in, we would be getting closer to 100,000 is my recollection of what I had tallied. I don't know if Herb has a better number.
So you would be with the 33.8 that's going in this year and related interest, you'll be at about 62,000. If you add in the 53, correct, you'll be at just barely over 100,000.
It's 43.
43. Yeah.
Sorry, but yeah.
Okay. And what's our current guess on the cost of the next reappraisal?
So, John, I haven't had a current number given to me, but I think if you use, we have 1,700 parcels because we'll reappraise everything, not just taxable ones, but we would reappraise everything. And if you multiply 1,700 times $200 a parcel, that would be my outside guess right now on the dollars we would need. And when I say that, it's not just the firm that would do the work, but the postage and the hours needed to accomplish that.
Okay. How does that compare with the cost of the last reappraisal?
So the last reappraisal that was done was that was a second one done in 16, which was more, it was really not a full reappraisal. It was a statistical reappraisal, which is a different reappraisal process. There's several you can, decide to do. I think at the time we go to do one, we're going to need a full reappraisal. It's my opinion. And I can't tell you that because off the top of my head, because NEMIC was on a recurring contract basis, and it tallies up to at least 150, I would have thought, when you added up all the numbers, but I'm guessing, John.
It's 1,700 times 200 is 340,000, I think.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So again, we're going to plan to put out an RFP. The listers are in January. Our knowledge that we have right now is that most of the firms that are approved by the state are busy and committed out. And so unless we get out our RFP to find a spot with somebody, we're going to be out to like 2023 before we'll have somebody able to do the work. So it's not around the corner, We have time to find out what the cost will be, but I know right now 100,000 won't do it. But just how we decided to propose the budget and put the dollars where we thought would be most important on a flat basis for the most part.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems to be, right, and it has been every year that we've talked about it, the most important part of the this piece of the budget. And I think when we get into the discussion of the designated fund, it would be good to have that information as to what the current thinking is about the cost of what this will be, how that compares to the last time we did it, why, if it's, you know, dramatically more expensive than the last time we did it, why that would be. That sort of thing would be helpful in making the decision.
Sure. The 13 reappraisal was a full-blown reappraisal. The 16 reappraisal was a statistical reappraisal. And like I said, two different processes. The statistical doesn't require you to go inside homes and inspect. So the hours are reduced for that, to my knowledge. And we'll bring that forward. That sounds good.
So Pam Smith has her hand up, Claudette.
Before we go to Pam, any other select board questions?
So I have a process question, Claudette, I'm sorry. So why would we not talk about designated funds now when we have the listers here? Are we doing that separately? John alluded to a different day for that conversation. Maybe we should just talk about that.
To me, this is the first broad overview of what the departments are asking.
Okay.
So, including designated funds. But right now, Cheryl is projecting increasing the designated fund allocation to $43,000. I think it's up to us to determine if that's sufficient. John?
Yeah, so, and we can do this any way we want this year. But historically, we've tended to do the designated funds and capital spending as a separate day's discussion. There's good arguments for both ways, right? Like it makes sense to be talking about it right here.
Join the meeting.
And the designated fund capital budget spending discussion generally, there's a lot of money involved over a lot of years. And so there's arguments for keeping that sort of coherent in one separate discussion as well. It definitely spills over in both directions. I think it's helpful to encourage that spilling, to let people talk about it when it makes sense to talk about it. But that's, I think, why we've done it that way before.
Thanks.
Any other select board comments? Pam, go ahead.
Thank you. As a lister, I just wanted to clarify a couple things that Cheryl was covering. We have moved $10,000 from the professional services budget over to the reappraisal fund, and that's how we're keeping our budget level funded. The other thing on the cost of reappraisal, looking at the justification that we put together, we were anticipating a minimum of $150 per parcel. So we're looking at, for 1,700 parcels, $255,000. And that would be a low number for the reappraisal, which is why we're trying to build up the fund now.
Okay, thank you. And with your RFP, what year would you be thinking about having a full reappraisal?
So the thinking that we have right now is that we will put out an RFP. We'll finalize an RFP. We'll let the select board know that we've drafted it, we're working on it, and we will put it out to all of the state certified organizations that do reappraisals and elsewhere. post it in the normal places. And we're not sure what the date will be. We're sort of subject to the responses that we get. We really don't know what the date might be on that, but we're hearing that 21 and 22 are very busy years right now, currently for reappraisal firms.
Sure. Oh.
John had a,
Yeah, Cheryl, do you or any of the listeners or Herb, do you happen to know offhand a 1% increase in the grand list? What does that correlate to in terms of annual tax dollars coming into the budget?
Well, my response would be if the grand list were to go up substantially, the tax rate's going to go down likely because you've got more assessed dollars.
Right, but assuming it didn't, what would that go across? Like if we just kept the rate at what it was and a 1% increase in the value, how much extra revenue would that generate?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that, John. Does Herb have a stab at it?
The reason, while Herb's looking, I can see him furiously like digging around on it. And if he impresses us with having that at his fingertips, that'll be great. Philosophically, the reason I ask, and you know, this has come up in previous discussion of this item, right? The assumption in doing a town-wide reappraisal is that we've fallen behind in the value of our property, right? We're certainly not going to see a situation where the price of property in Norwich has fallen, right? It's going to be up somewhat. And so while we may be a little bit behind in the cost of that reappraisal, my guess is that will easily be paid for in the first year after that reappraisal because of that higher value. So people will see that as an increase in their taxes. That is true. But that's reflecting the fact that the property is increased in value significantly. And so I don't know that it's important to make sure that we've got every dollar of that covered before that happens, recognizing that the process itself will generate money for it.
Other than the firm's going to want to be paid at the end of the reappraisal. They're going to want to be paid. And the other thing I would say, John, is again, yes, the values will likely go up. That's the trend right now. I've seen, and you all have seen articles about Vermont properties selling way over the assessed values throughout the state. And it's a problem they're all having. But, you know, if there isn't as big of a need in the budget, then the budget requirement is down, you know, the taxes may not be that much greater. I don't know. It's hard to me to answer that, but.
So my only question, Claudia, if I may, is so Pam Smith's, I appreciate her back of the envelope numbers. So, you know, and then John was asking what year are you doing with reappraisal? And I understand that, like, you know, the labor is a question, like in terms of when you can get someone in the contract. But my question is, when do you need $250,000 to do your reappraisal? We're not on track to do that by 2023, is that right?
Well, when are we on track to do the reappraisal? We won't have that really, Roger, until we get responses back. We don't want it to happen before 22 probably because we don't have the funds, but right. We're good to go maybe after that, even if it requires a bump in tax dollars to get that reappraisal, you know, paid for. Okay. Or borrow some money temporarily. I don't know the answer. Those are just other things that come to mind.
Okay, but the listers are there. Your department is not or your governance is not recommending. I'm just surprised to hear $250,000 and then see the request in the budget. Like, I appreciate the level funding. However, it sounds like you need more than level funding. And so I'm trying to reconcile that. And, you know.
Yeah, I can say to you that we talked about this quite a bit as we did the budget and put it together as to, you know, what are we spending currently? And the line item for professional services seems not to be needed. So we shifted the dollars down to the reappraisal request and feel that we're in, a better spot for the numbers that we need to support the department. So again, if we're going to have another visit with the capital part of the budget and all, we can pull together some additional information. But what we have right now is what I've offered so far.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Pam Smith has her hand up.
Go ahead, Pam.
Well, I think one thing we have to remember is we've requested more money in the past and it's been reduced. So now we're in this mode of trying to catch up. The other thing is we don't know when we'll be able to get a firm on board to start doing the reappraisal. It could be 2024 if they're all booked up through 2023. And we also don't know the size of the firm. Will they have enough staff to do the appraisal in 1 year, or will it take 2 or even 3? We don't know. So these are all variables that we can't answer until we finish our RFP and get it out to some of these firms to see what we might be able to lock in for a reappraisal, the cost and the timing.
John?
So we've heard this discussion of the RFP now a couple times. So I just want to be clear. You don't need anything from us to do this RFP, right? Like, you guys are independent elected officials and you can go out, and if you think we need to be bidding out now for a reappraisal in 2022, you're fully able to do that. We don't need anything to authorize you to do
Right.
that, correct?
We started back in March working on this, but then the COVID-19 interrupted our process. So we're back to it now.
Okay.
And we hope to have
was
it done
confused 'cause
within.
it sounded like that was related to the budget somehow.
No, it's just, well, it is in that we don't know what it's going to cost because we haven't been able to get estimates from any of the firms of what their going rate is. So, but we hope to finish this up very, very soon, hopefully by the end of the year.
And I believe they need our okay to submit the RFP.
Right, we're going to bring it to you.
Yeah, that was our plan.
So, okay. Anything else? Seeing none. Thank you, Cheryl.
Okay.
I always hear your plea for more appraisal funds.
Yeah.
So, okay. Moving on to planning and zoning. Rod, your turn.
Hello, everybody. So it's another budget quite similar to the previous years. There's minor adjustments. Some of those reflect the change in operations in light of COVID-19, although it's hard to predict what will really be happening in 2022. The only other obvious change is that there's basically no money for the town plan, because the town plan won't need to be worked on for another 6 years. So the adjustments are all pretty minor. The total increase is 1.8%. There's some minor moving around of small funds, but people have got questions about that, and I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Rod?
Same question as Bonnie earlier, Rod. If you felt like you didn't have any restrictions in place, what is something that improves the quality of services for our town, or improves your own, work? What do you need that's not reflected in this budget that you may wish was reflected in this budget?
Right. I appreciate the interest and the concern. So it is basically a level funded budget, and that's in line with the direction from the town manager. If I was to focus on the quality of services that we provide to the community and the kind and the quality of the work that we provide to the community, I think the single biggest area that is overdue for improvement is digitizing the land use permits in conjunction with digitizing the land records in the town clerk's office and having those accessible via the internet. I think it's borne out in our experience of COVID-19 that we're behind many other communities in that regard. And to do that and to make it viable, we would need to make a substantial commitment to improving the information technology infrastructure of the town in general. So the current IT environment isn't in a place where it would support any of these additional functions. And until we address the serious shortcomings of the web page, the server, offsite access, the speed of accessing the town web page, and web-based services, including accessing land records and maps, then there's not much that planning can do about it individually.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So it sounds like what you're speaking to directly affects some of the work that's under your tutelage, but it's part of a wider proposal that intersects with administration and the town clerk.
Sure. So yeah, just any significant improvement in what planning services provides the public would be products that were accessed online, and to do that, we would need to visit the question of the town's IT capacity.
Okay.
And I have one question for you, Rod. I have no idea the speed of Comcast, which I believe is your internet provider, versus I know the super fast speed of EC fiber. So if we're if the technology pieces are fixed, would it still be a problem if you've got such crappy Comcast?
We've got Comcast Municipal, which is, not much different from household Comcast, which is, okay, but not really for an organization the size of Norwich.
And I'm thinking downloading maps, a higher speed would be tremendously helpful.
So let me tell you. So the download speed that you have at home is your problem, and then the speed, because you're accessing things not from the cloud, because we don't have stuff in the cloud, but you're accessing it from our server, which is ancient and really slow. Yeah, it's not going to work. It actually isn't going to work. It's too slow. It'll just drop. So to change that, you would need to either make a commitment to put those products like maps and the interactive maps in the cloud and pay for that to be there. And then the only limitation on how fast you could download that is the end users access, whether you're using your phone in the park or whether you're driving by and you're downloading it in your car on 91 or whatever it is. But right now, we don't have any of that connectivity because everything's stored on the server, and even if you could access it, it wouldn't happen because of the speeds. So there's a lot of pieces in there that would need to change, and so I want to say really clearly that if you had a really funky dial-up situation or a very limited access to internet wherever you were, even if the town got a very slick system, you still might not have a very good experience. But for most people, most of the time in most of the world, if Norwich did something about its IT, it would massively improve the range of products that we could offer and the quality of those products. So right now we don't have a way of directing people to access their own information about their own properties and so forth via the internet in any meaningful way.
All right.
And that's become kind of a standard expectation. You should be able to review key aspects of the property that you own on your phone, and you can't for Norwich.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Rod.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And Herb, I believe you touched on recreation, unless there are other questions from the board, since I don't see anybody, unless Town of Norwich, is that Bree?
I didn't do recreation.
That's me. Yeah.
I just touched
okay.
base on the tennis.
I'm here. Sorry, I should have changed my name. Sorry about that.
So now, Bree, it's you.
Okay, great. So obviously, things are a little bit odd with us. We were doing great till March when we had to shut everything down. However, I do feel like we still were able to offer some pretty robust programming. Our summer camps ran as a kind of a trial for the schools. So I think that was really great and helped a lot of families feel more comfortable sending their children back to school as well, because the children were used to all the protocols from being in summer camp with us. And we still got all of those teen counselors that we were able to mentor, which was pretty surprising, but you know, it's a great community, and they all came out, they all got trained. It was really great. So I don't think our revenue is obviously going to be as wonderful as it was going from FY19 to FY20 when we had a 52% increase. But I do feel like we've done pretty well. I will say that our budget looks about the same this for 22 as it did for 21, just because we weren't able to do a lot of what we had planned. So I would like another opportunity to get a shot at that. There are some changes related to field care. If you've been by Huntley, you know we need something. So I would like to look at having some consultants come in, either from Bergeron or from Todd Holmes, who is the new consultant over at the Hanover High School fields, and the coaches over there have said that he's really great in repairing fields, which is what we need at this point. I have talked to the DPW person who used to work for the Quechee Club, and he has given me his binder before. We've already reviewed what's needed immediately. So that is considered in the field care. He says we need at least 3,500 just to start in the spring only. So that's just for spring. That's just for composting, for aeration, for trying to figure out what kind of invasive whatever that is that's taken up so much of the field, and repair that part. The other thing that we've reduced entry fees. That's mostly because I would like to start hosting our own jamborees and tournaments and get some revenue out of that instead of paying other people for our teams to go to them. When it's repaired, we have a beautiful field. I think that we could use that space. And as Herb mentioned, there is an increase in the designated tennis court fund. I had 7,500. He put 15,000. I do support that if we can't have a successful fundraising campaign. I did have a citizen ask me if we should have some kind of fundraising campaign that's much more visible down at the tennis courts, because we have an awful lot of non-residents down there, and they don't have an opportunity to put any kind of money into repairing those tennis courts. And I think if we had some signage down there, and our wonderful Youth Advisory Council already created a QR code, so we can put a QR code right down there and capture those dollars when people see that there's a need. and the United States U.S. Tennis Association has a 50% matching grant for municipalities for rebuild of tennis courts. So that could reduce that number quite a bit. But I do think we should plan for the fact that that might not happen because people are hurting. So the reason we are so popular is also because we're free and we're open, and there's a reason for that we would be so popular right now. So,
John?
What's the guess for the cost for the refurbishment there, and versus what's in the fund currently?
Right now we have about, Herb, I think you said like 8,500 in the budget, right, in the designated fund right now. A patch job is significant. It's about 2,500 just to do a patch job, so I don't want to do that again. And the complete rebuild is anywhere from $85,000 to $150,000. And that actually has to do with the water table. So what they find once they grind down those tennis courts and find what's underneath there, because we are in not a designated floodplain, I believe, but we do have an ever-changing river there. So that water table could have changed quite a bit, and we also have all of those enormous trees on either side of them that could be underneath the tennis court, and we might have to take care of that too. So it's a large difference in cost, but it's kind of one of those, we just don't know what's under there yet. So I'd rather plan for the more expensive option.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, just also on the tennis court query, have you given consideration to clay courts, and would that be, more expensive, more maintenance? Is that an option that would be helpful?
So there's significantly more maintenance, and I'm not sure how we could do that because that would be asking an awful lot of our DPW staff.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make, I think it's, I'm really interested in this idea of like private money to support public goods to the extent that it provides like an opportunity for people to further give back in a particular or unique way to their community. But I never want to get to the point when we're talking about a budget where public uses are like privatized out through some fundraising initiative. Like I really, the tennis courts are for the public. We should be using public money for them, and whatever we need to do to get there, we should get there. I think like rec is a unique department where, the friends of the rec department is like certainly like a potential more so than any other department. And I know that some of that etiquette has been used for certain things here and there, but I just wanted to make that point that I don't want to get privatized or in a charity model with our public programs or our public assets. It's not good. And then my other question is the same as everyone else. What would you do differently if you had only your imagination, Bree, to plan for your department?
So I would probably say this, if I were going to, I mean, there's a lot, there's like a community center, get more people out, but I really do think if money was no object, I would probably be looking at a part-time athletic manager to take the youth sports part. That's a huge part.
Any other questions from anyone? Board or public?
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Would you see, Bree, would one be able to assume that the increased revenue that would come with having someone focus on athletic programs justify the expense of that position?
I would think so if they're a part-time position that could grow the idea of having more programming within Norwich that actually brings in money instead of us going to other communities, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl has her hand up.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, Bree.
Hey.
Hi, did you work on the revenue side? There's a line item for recreation programs. Is that your number?
Hold on. I'm just going to that sheet. I'm sorry.
It's the first page of the revenue budget report. Down, where it's like really down by the bottom. I was just curious, it's down 5%. I get that. In some ways I get that.
So it's actually down 5% because of COVID. Because I'm actually planning that we may not be able to have that after school. And that was a big bump in our revenue. And if we can't get back into the school, and if we can't have after camp, that does concern me. I do think that I'd rather plan to not be able to have the after school, unfortunately.
So just as a related thing, is there any expense line item that dropped with that as well, or?
There were a few that dropped.
Okay. Was it the anything to do with instructor fees, or was the
No, we dropped the entry fee. Yeah, we dropped a few of them. Probably not up to that amount. I mean, that's really it's planning where we hadn't been able to plan for a pandemic. So,
right.
It's looking at exactly what we're going through right now and saying we might still be in that place.
So the other thing I know we talked about at one point was the credit cards and the use of those. And did you feel there was a benefit that was derived from that switch that was made?
That we're not paying credit card fees anymore? Yes.
Well, we're still paying them.
So we're giving people the option to pay that 3%, or they can pay via check.
Okay.
So it's more flexible. I do feel like people have been a lot happier with that, because when you're paying for summer camp, 3% is a heck of a lot of money, and being able to pay it by check and have that option is great. But then there are other people who don't mind paying that 3%. But I do think that the flexibility is great, and not having the town automatically pay that 3%. Just feels better.
So if our pre-audit was 11,008 for this year, and we budgeted 8,500 for the next 2 years, or the budget we're looking at, I was just curious if that number should be higher. It's the bottom of page 3 of your expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Is that 8,500?
That is not all the registration system or the credit card fees. Actually, that line item probably needs a different name. So that registration system is just under $5,000. The registration also covers anytime we're registering a program anywhere. Cal Ripken goes in there. So when Cal Ripken registers their team, that's where they go. When they go to, I don't even remember what it's called, but when they have to, it's licensing or something like that, but it's a registration, so they have to do one for every team. So that's not just the registration system. That's not just registration fees.
Oh, okay. It looked low is all.
8,500 looked low?
Well, according to the year-end number with $11,800 as an actual.
That actual from FY20 is because that's when I switched our accounts. So that is when we got our new registration system, which does not charge us a fee per registration like it used to. So we were still under the previous registration. So you're still going to see registration fees from before we got that new system, which is in February, the beginning of February. So that was just an odd year.
Okay.
So that was always going to be a little higher.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Manu has a public comment, or his hand went down.
I don't want to take any more time. It's not that material. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Bree.
Sure, no problem.
which brings us up to the police department and Chief Frank. Take it away.
Bear with me, folks. I'm borrowing a camera today, so hopefully you can all see me. I do also have a short 5-slide presentation I wanted to share. If it's all right with you, Roger, can I request a screen share? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Also my first time doing this, so I apologize if it's not perfect. Hopefully everybody can see the screen there. Just going to highlight real briefly. It's 5 slides, so bear with me. I know you're already familiar with our staff. We've got our 4 full-time officers and our 2 part-time officers. We have an administrative assistant and 3 crossing guards. The additional crossing guard this year is just to account for when Demo and Norm happen to be out. We provide 24-hour day coverage, 7 days a week for 365 days a year. I wanted to kind of summarize some things that are unique that specifically speak to our budget this year. One of those is our calls for service. This year we had an increase of 479 calls, which is a 35% increase. I bring that up because some of our budgeting numbers are accounting for the fact that we've seen an increase in calls for service, which also comes for some additional costs that come with that. In addition to that, for our motor vehicle stops, we had a 33% increase. We went to 902 motor vehicle stops this year, which has 560 warnings, 62%, and 342 tickets. I bring this up just because it helps us to kind of get a general overlook of what we're looking at. The budget in general, you'll notice, contains an increase of 3.88%, which is slightly higher than what we had presented as a department, which was at the 3.54. 78% of that budget is wages and benefits. Less than 1% is community policing, 2.8% is equipment and maintenance, 14% is what we call support, and 3.5% is the designated fund. What the budget request this year is an increase of $23,725, which using the 2010 census numbers averages out to $186 a resident is what they would pay for the 24/7, 365 service for each year. One of the things that we don't often see is the police revenue. So I just wanted to highlight that. I specifically am highlighting the last 6 months. Obviously, we'd have to double that to get a full year amount. But in the last 6 months, the police department's brought in a revenue of $5,265. And those are a combination of different fines. Those are speeding tickets or parking tickets, animal control, police reports, fines, some of those others. We were able to obtain $8,880 in grant reimbursement, and that's the OPDUI, Governor's Highway Safety, Violence Against Women's Act, the passive grant, and $3,000 in equipment and tuition. So the benefit to that is in the last 6 months, we've brought in $17,165, which helped us to be able to save some anticipated expenses. Assuming that would double, and it's difficult to know, we'd be looking at about a $34,000 anticipated revenue. And that also doesn't include the November ticket posting yet. So that number would increase slightly for the 6-month element. The small chart on the side just kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at for our budget. And again, I apologize because I can't really see it because I'm hidden by myself here, but hopefully you can see it. It shows how much is there for the funding on the quarter. I did want to highlight what I would call like some budget anomalies. The Norwich Police Department stayed under budget in all 4 of our account categories, which are wages and benefits, community policing, equipment, maintenance, and support. But there were a couple of anomalies that I want to address because they impact the budget that we presented this year. One of those was animal control. The animal control amount was set by a budget that was in existence before I was the police chief here. We recognized last year that it was insufficiently funded, and we put that money in. Unfortunately, that's for this year, the current year. So you're going to notice that we overspent last year in the budget, but we knew that was going to happen because we knew it was underfunded. So we've already corrected that. So you'll notice that we continued forward with that correction. The town manager spoke to it, so I won't spend a lot of time. One of the other anomalies you'll notice was there was a police chief wage difference. That was for the accrual amount for vacation and comp time for the former police chief who had retired and transitioned in positions. We also had some unanticipated costs, some tow bills and software and things that you wouldn't expect to add up, but very quickly, Microsoft Word, for example, cost $600 by the time we had it on all the computers. And we had 5 different vehicles that were stolen this year, people who had left their keys in the car and were taken by somebody who didn't have permission. Rather than when those vehicles leave, rather than charging it back to the victim, the state has a policy that the departments absorb that cost. So each tow bill is at $200+ That adds an extra, sometimes $1,000, $1,500.
Join the meeting.
We hadn't anticipated. So those are some of the anomalies. This year, you'll notice in the budget, we have some anomalies that we hadn't originally anticipated, but we think might be coming. Some of those are COVID-related expenses, tests, PPE, cleaning supplies. For example, 2 weeks ago, one of my officers had a fever, and per our policy, they have to get a test. The test costs $75. Well, that's also the cost of a pair of uniform pants. So having to figure out how to adjust for your different costs there. One of the biggest things that we're looking at for a very potential expense is based off of Senate Bill 219, which was signed in by the governor. And is a new section 720 VSA 1818. I'll kind of summarize essentially what it's looking at. That's saying that all officers are going to be required to wear body cameras as a part of their transparency for their job. We're supportive of this. We believe it's helpful. And if you'll notice in the designated fund section in our capital asset budget, I did speak more to it. And it sounds like we're going to have an opportunity to touch on that later. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. But what has happened is the governor signed it into effect. It's currently mandated for for Vermont State Police. They have to do it, but the legislature has made it very clear. It is coming to all departments. It's switching over to municipal, but they are beginning with Vermont State Police. Because of that, we know that that's an expense that we had not anticipated for this year, but it's going to start this year and then transition over. Unfortunately, those are very expensive units, somewhere in upwards of the tune of $38,000 to $40,000 when you do body cameras and in-car cameras. The current in-car systems that we have, our cameras, as I've spoken to you about before, are antiquated, dilapidated, and they occasionally do not work. Not more than occasionally, often they don't work. We have to tap the screen to make it work. I believe Select Board member Langus was with me one time when we were tapping the back of the mirror to try to get it to activate. I bring this up because the body camera system and software is incompatible with the cameras that we have, because the cameras we have are back from 2013 before these were an element. So we recognize we have to increase that. We've started to pursue and seek different types of grant funding that might be out there, but we know that's a potentially $38,000 to $40,000 expense that we hadn't considered, covering the cameras and the server that's going to hold all of the video that we need to keep for the state mandated level of time. Another, what I would call an anticipated anomaly, is the NEPBA union contract was signed back in October. And in that was a expectation that a shield and helmet would be involved in every police cruiser. That is not something that was originally part of our greater strategic plan. However, the union contract was signed and that was an agreement on it. So although it wasn't part of the strategic plan, those expenses do have to be paid. I will note that because of some of the different things that have gone on nationwide, that the cost of helmets and shields have skyrocketed. In fact, they are almost twice what they were approximately six to 8 months ago. So we're working to try to figure out how we can meet our union contract mandate, but that comes with a pretty heavy price tag. And you'll notice again in the material that I provided some different invoices and quotes. I'll switch over here to kind of look at it's one thing to look at it in a silo, but I think it's important to look at it from a strategic overview. Looking at our plan, we really built off the 21st century policing model of looking at, where do we want to be as a police department? Where does our community expect us to be as a police department? Where does the nation look at the future of law enforcement? And so keeping those in mind, we spent some time talking about where are some areas that we really need to focus our efforts as we start to move forward. And some of that includes the focus of our budgeting as well. Specifically, we looked at our fleet. We know that not only as a nation and as a town and as a department, we're pursuing a green fleet policy, which is going to come with some increased expenses. We know from purchasing the most recent hybrid that comes with a small increase in a price tag. So we recognize that there's some additional funding that might have to be allocated there. With that, though, we also realize that if we have vehicles that are successful and running and what I would call reliable, that we can reduce our fleet. And we think that's important when we start to look at what the town has said. Clearly, the town and the select board is pursuing a reduced fleet. We believe that we can go from 4 vehicles down to 3 vehicles. The challenge to that, though, is we need them to be reliable. I bring that up because we literally ran the wheels off of one of our cruisers 2 months ago, and the radiator went on another cruiser. And that happens. They're 8 and 9-year-old vehicles, and so they're going to have some things start to go on them. Our challenge now is for those vehicles, the maintenance costs are beginning to exceed the value and worth of the vehicle. So when we speak to the designated fund, you'll see why we're trying to put some additional monies into that to get into a rotating policy so that our vehicles, which we would keep for 5 years and rotate through, would not have the maintenance costs that they do now. Also looking at our strategic overview, you'll notice we put some emphasis on equipment and trying to bring those things up to standard. It also allows the officers to have some additional options in the event we have to respond. Under retention, we spent some time looking again at the officers' wages, different education, training, recognizing that sometimes we need to look at things differently, think differently, be trained differently. But that also comes with some expenses. And last but not least, under our strategic overview, we've started to look at allocating some money towards credentialing. The concept with credentialing is basically recognizing that we want to make sure that our practices are best practices, consistent with state standards and with national standards. And we would like to do that through an independent credentialing agency, someone who can look at us and say, hey, this is really functioning well, or maybe you should reevaluate this because of one error or one success or another. To get a broad perspective of that, I wanted people to see the region. And I took a 10-year analysis, and fortunately the Valley News was actually very helpful. They did some of my early research for me. The NPD budget over the last decade has increased by 19%. When you compare it to the other 6 Upper Valley areas, Hanover, Hartford, Windsor, Claremont, and Lebanon, I chose those because those are what the Valley News recognizes as what they call the six PDs of the Upper Valley. You'll notice that we have a pretty, what I would say either consistent or less than increase, similar to other PDs in the region. You'll also notice under our municipal budget that what we're requesting this year would be 11.7% of the municipal budget. In 2020, we were approximately 13% of the budget, and you can see some of the other areas. Last but not least, there at the broader perspective, taking a look at our budget, the last budget, that number seems high. It is a little high. And the reason for that is what we did is we added half of the public safety facility into our accounting. That's difficult to do because when you look at the other police departments, many of them don't separately pay for electricity or water or sewer costs or fire alarm costs because that's built into the towns as a whole. That's the general update of our broader perspective of what we looked at. I don't know how much time you wanted us to spend specifically with designated funds because I know there's been some cost. But under our designated funds, we recognize 2 general issues. One is the special equipment challenge. Special equipment has become the catch-all for our larger items. And that includes everything from ballistic vests to firearms, to radios, to computers, to the speed calming devices. Those are the flashing signs, for example, on the side of the road that tell you how fast you're going. It includes the body cameras, the radar units, the portable, the PBTs, kind of name it, it catches all. The challenge we run into is we currently are putting $2,500 in annually to that fund. And a radio, for example, from Motorola, one portable radio costs $2,100. And so recognizing that what we're putting in doesn't equate what we recognize needs to come out. We went through a time period where the police department had a hyper focus, and the hyper focus was on getting a building that was something that the police department could use. The challenge to that is we had to spend a lot of our money and effort and time there, and some of our equipment really fell by the wayside. And we've done a great job over the last couple of years of trying to repair that, but we still have some equipment that desperately needs to get fixed. Mostly this next 1, 2, 3 budgets is probably going to meet the legislative and our union contract requirements, which I already spoke to, reference the body camera, the in-car cameras, and the shields and the helmets. As for the cruiser, we, in August of 2019, received approval from the Select Board for the replacement of EQ3. We just picked that up actually about a week and a half ago. It still has to get lettered and have a couple of things put into it, but we needed to get it because we were down to 1 vehicle because we had 2 in the shop. So we picked it up before it was lettered. The lettering got pushed back anyways because of COVID, because we had a slight delay on actually receiving the vehicle. So recognizing that that was there, we were able to put $10,000 back into the cruiser fund to account for the sale of EQ3. With that in mind, we recognize that EQ4, and I know it sounds silly to call them by those names, but it has more than 107,000 miles on it. It is regularly going in for significant amount of work. We need to replace that vehicle and then start to begin our transition. Once we get back on track, I think our numbers will look very different. In fact, I know our numbers will look different, but we just got to get caught back up, and that accounts for some of our budget. Other than that, our budget was pretty consistent running through. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hopefully I can do it successfully without accidentally turning anybody off here.
Questions from the board?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Roger.
I think I saw in one of the documents that in parenthetical that the future cars would be leased. Is that, and I know that's something that you've done some research on. So perhaps at a high level, could you talk about the merits of leasing vehicles, police vehicles, versus taking them on as capital assets?
Absolutely. Really, the benefit came down to the fact that we needed to get into a cycle and we didn't know how to do that financially. And so the benefit to leasing is not actually that that it saves money one direction or another. In fact, there's actually a slight increase in cost by doing the leasing. What it does allow us to do is it allowed us to be able to begin turning over that fleet at a faster rate to get us onto the cycle sooner. If we were to continue to go at the rate we were going with the designated fund, we had pushed out to somewhere around 2050 before we were going to be back on track. So the leasing option was something we looked at, saying if we leased, we could start to begin this cycle, get us back where we're supposed to be, and make sure that our officers are in safe vehicles.
Thank you. And so is the desire of the department to eventually own these 3 vehicles, or as long as it sounds like as long as the priority is safety and functionality of the cars, then leasing is sufficient? So is the goal eventually to own them after the cycle's back on track, or is leasing long-term sufficient for your goals? I guess is my question.
So it is more beneficial for the town and for the police department to own them. So depending on your cycle, you complete your leasing cycle, you can then purchase the vehicle, let's say for $1. The reason that that's beneficial is the turnaround. So for example, EQ3, which we just sold, when we attempted to return it, we reached out to Ford and reached out to others and said, what would you be willing to give us for this vehicle? They laughed at us a bit, and then they offered us $2,000. I believe that we could probably do a better job repurposing that out elsewhere. We were able to find another community that has a constable. So he has a different requirement for level of equipment. And that community purchased the vehicle for $10,000, which gave us an $8,000 increase. The challenge to simply leasing them is once you put all the equipment into them and you give the car back, you get your equipment back, but it's hard to sell equipment piecemeal. Being able to take a vehicle that is outfitted that maybe doesn't need a police need anymore, but might be better suited to a constable or a DPW or to somebody else who maybe doesn't have the same electronic demand on the vehicle or same pursuit demand or response. I think we can get a better, I know we can get a better return for our value. So the idea with leasing would be that we would lease to get on cycle. You would purchase the vehicle for the $1 at the completion of the lease. If you then are able, if the vehicle's functional and working successfully and not having significant mechanicals, you might even be able to hold it out the extra year moving from that point forward and then sell it for a good return coming back.
Great. And then I have one more question, if that's okay, Claudette.
Go right ahead, Roger.
Okay, thanks. So I feel like a lot of folks, I don't know if this is your observation, Chief, that everyone's tangentially been talking about your staffing, but you haven't talked about your staffing with us. So can you talk about like what's going on in staffing? I noticed your on-call wages has increased this year, and last year, while the budgeted amount didn't increase, the actuals were also going up, I had noticed. And I know that in your thoughtful budgeting, you correct me if I'm wrong, tend to look at the actuals in order to bake your budgeting over the 3 years. So I want to note that if actuals are going up and then budgeting is staying the same, it's very likely that we'll see budget increases in the future, based on that logic anyway, I'm not saying. So that's a long setup, and I apologize, but I guess broadly, can you just talk about some of your staffing needs and what the ask would be?
Sure.
I guess of us. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
No, that's a great question. Some of the most of our increases, for example, as I've noted in our wages and salaries, is because we are union contracted. And so we do have our step increases and your COLA increases in FICA and Medicare, which accounts for that. But I'm glad that you asked about staffing, because that has almost been a perpetual challenge for the Norwich Police Department. As I talked to the chief prior to me, and fortunately, I actually knew Chief Soares even before that, it seems to be a challenge that Norwich has faced for many years. I'll give you this year, for example, we had in the last year, we had an officer that was out for Family Medical Leave Act for 6 months. And when one person is out, it dramatically impacts what we have for staffing. And so it means that you've got somebody who's trying to do maybe more than one job at a time, and filling in the gap, which sometimes also increases overtime because we have staff trying to fill that. If one officer gets sick, it throws our entire schedule off. We are not a community that has 7 or 8 officers on at a time. So if one person was absent, you could just kind of cover the gap. If somebody's absent, somebody else is coming in for overtime, unfortunately. So by having an officer out for 6 months on FMLA, that officer returned, and 2 days later, an officer went out on injury for 2 weeks. That officer came back, and as soon as that officer came back, another officer got injured and was out 3 months. And December 1st, ironically, yesterday was actually his first day back. I am fully staffed for 3 days. I'm very excited about that. However, at the conclusion of those 3 days, our sergeant, who was very kind and pushed back his paternity leave due to the officer getting injured, is going to be leaving on paternity leave, and he will be out for a period of time. So the challenge I've run into is over the last year and a half, I think we've been fully staffed, and please don't quote me on the number of days, but I do know it's less than a month that we've been fully staffed. So we've had to do a lot of overtime, a lot of shifting around on calls. We, for a brief time, had a part-time officer who was able to fill some of the gap that helped us quite a bit. But due to COVID regulations, he's a full-time corrections officer. They're limiting their access to the general public so that they don't spread it throughout their community there. So we haven't been able to utilize that on our end of the spectrum. So when it comes to an ask, ideal world where money wasn't an option. I've spoken with the town manager of a couple of options of looking at bringing an additional officer on, specifically an officer who's multi-trained in 2 areas. We recognize we have 2 significant staffing needs. One of those is investigative. We need someone from a detective standpoint who can do some interviews, spend the time on burglaries, spend the time doing out of town investigation work, being able to go and look at some of your pawn shops and have conversations with people outside of our community who may have been engaged in criminal activity. That's hard to do because our officers have to stay here. We have to take calls because there's only one of us. So that's an area of need. But coupled with the fact, most recently I spoke with a town manager about looking at bringing on an officer who has some social work training. We recognize that there's a real significant increase in mental health calls, what we call social need and social related calls. And we have seen some success of bringing on law enforcement officers who also are by trained. And they have training in specifically working with people in the community from a different perspective than necessarily just an enforcement. We work closely with our judicial diversion programs and some of those others. So those are kind of the 2 areas where in an ideal world where we had some extra funding, that's definitely a need that we recognize that we have. Right now, in some ways, we're running through survival mode, which is we got to have a body in the cruiser who can respond to the calls and respond to the shift. And having that extra person on would not only alleviate if somebody was sick or out for service or injured, but it would also allow somebody to really be able to focus on some of those personal or societal or mental health needs that might exist out there that we're covering the gap on, but may not be able to provide the same level of service that we'd like.
Thank you. And then my final, just as a follow-up, in order to, would the look of policing have to change? Of course, the alternative would just be to have not 24-hour policing in Norwich. And if we did that, our staffing needs may be met. So you would go, if you change the way that patrolling was done, one could argue that the staffing needs would be covered too, right? I recognize that that's not something you put on the table in your conversation, but that is also something that could be done too, I imagine. Right?
Potentially. So I guess what I would address with that is somebody has to cover the gap. Somebody has to fill that shift. And so in many areas, they will reach out. So I'll say, for example, Thetford contracts with Vermont State Police, and Vermont State Police cover the gap there. The challenge that we've run into is Vermont State Police has made it very clear that they are not accepting contracts. In fact, they said, in a direct quote, they said, "We don't want the contracts we have." They are looking to change their focus in some of those elements. There are some other agencies that you can contract out with, but the cost of that it would be very significant for the non 24/7 coverage. That time frame, the officers are only receiving an on-call wage, which is, we just passed the contract and they're doing some COLA modifications, but it's essentially like $2.67 an hour or $2.70 an hour. So the 24/7 coverage element for that time when we're on call is not the significant funding element. The significant funding is when we have somebody who's out and we have to cover that for an overtime shift. That's really where our funding changes happen.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the chief? I do have, I thought, and this is just an aside that maybe I'll let you know, but COVID testing, I thought in the state of Vermont was free. If insurance must cover.
So the officer that had the fever is a New Hampshire resident. And when he went to do the testing, there was a $75 payment requirement. So I have the bill in hand, so I know it cost him $75. That's a great question. I wonder if the state of Vermont would allow, because we're first responders in the state of Vermont, I wonder if they would allow that exemption of testing.
Anybody can get tested in the state of Vermont at a pop-up site, at a state-funded at a state-run pop-up site. Anybody, doesn't matter if you're Vermont or not. Just FYI.
Yeah, and I'll look into trying to make sure to have our folks go to the right place. Hopefully no one will have fevers and people will.
Yeah, hopefully nobody will need to go get tested.
But I will certainly look into that to make sure that obviously we want to spend our money as best as we can.
And I know it's a chump change, but anyway. And the injury, not the FMLA, but the could it be related to lack of training, or was it something in the line of duty and that kind of thing?
So of those, there were 2 injuries. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the 3-month absent who just returned, that was done off duty, not related to law enforcement, not training related whatsoever. The other person, I'm comfortable sharing the information. The other person was in the process of responding to a DUI crash while there and was trying to affect that process, slipped down an embankment because it was raining and pouring out, slipped down the embankment into a river, and in the process of doing so, sprained their ankle. In many jobs, you can return back with a sprained ankle to the job the next day. Unfortunately, because of the nature of our career, that requires time off. And the 3-month one was just on his personal time. He got injured, had nothing to do with the job.
Okay, just wanted to be sure that it wasn't a training related issue. So, okay, thank you. That's all I had. Any other questions for Chief Frank? Seeing none. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, folks. Be safe.
All right. I just need to break for 2 minutes, but you can go on without me because our next is the town manager update, and I'll be right back. A verbal update. A quick one.
So Claudia yells a quick town manager update as she runs off. So you have your marching orders, Herb.
The quick one is that you'll have more of my written update at the next meeting. As part of this night, You do have some financials in front of you. Claudette had requested, if even before the year was closed out, if we could have, with the auditor here, if we could have the latest round of information. So please don't be confused that this packet had some November figures in it. It's probably pretty close to what's going to be the period end, but Becky had not yet closed out the month at that point. So you will get the November ones at the appropriate meeting coming up. But if you do have questions on that, please let me know. The most important thing I want to do with the verbal thing is the issue of the collateralization, making sure that we had the proper collateralization of the property tax revenues that drove us up over the limit. They were obviously very well-intentioned activities to protect that money, but probably every form of internal control was broken along the way. And so I've, with regard to not having approvals of setting up new accounts, to not having a dual person process, to a number of other things, I've spelled that out in an email to you yesterday. Today, I have had follow-up conversation with the town auditor. Bonnie did indicate tonight that she does encourage the passage of the information that I gave you. So I did send out earlier today in an email, because I just barely finished it before your meeting, and that was a list of recommended actions that you take specific to the banking services that were set up with regard to to the insured cash sweep account and the related small business checking account that were set up to protect, collateralize some funds that were going over our limit in the amount of about $3 million. So that was contained in the email that I sent out to you in a form of a letter from me. There's about 6 of those. And then there's some additional items in there that take you through points 7 through 15 that are not things that you have to deal with tonight, but are recommendations on my part. I think as a result of what occurred, we do need to further strengthen our internal controls because of there's the issue of some singularity actions that still are out there. And so I think that we need to tighten up our internal financial controls. And again, as much as there's no danger to any funds, it was all well-intentioned, done with the purpose of making sure that the funds were town funds were most protected. The problem is that internal controls were ignored along the way. So that's my summary.
Cheryl, would you want to provide us with your perspective or your understanding or recollection of what happened?
Sure. I mean, if there's questions, I can start with those, but otherwise, it was became aware to me that we were maintaining balances at the bank that were over the collateralization limit of our public funds, and to the tune of $3 million. When I realized that, I called Herb and I spoke with Herb about it. And the short version is there's very little email exchange to document what was discussed. So is what I remember saying, and maybe that's not what Herb remembers, but I didn't want to belabor it. I wanted to solve the situation. And I had a couple of suggestions, one of which was that we have the select board meet, or kind of an emergency meeting to move some funds and get them out of the town account to the school district where they would be headed anyway. And a second one was with the bank. They said that in order to increase the collateralization amount, it would cost $500 to make that change. And so that was not an option I thought was needed, because we really shouldn't pay money we didn't have to pay. The third option was the bank had said that they would open one of these ICS accounts to separately collateralize the $3 million and get it protected as funds should be. And so I spoke with Herb at length about this. He talked to Bonnie. Bonnie had a different understanding from what I recollect of how our funds are collateralized. And so I did not feel it was right to spend money. So the lack of wanting to have a board meeting, I opened up the other account to protect the $3 million. And that's, you know, a snapshot of what happened.
Board questions or comments? John?
So I understand the motivation for doing that. I don't understand the rationale of thinking that you were authorized to do that.
Well, I guess, John, if it had been a small number, like $50,000 over our collateralization, I would have not been concerned. I felt very concerned about $3 million being uncollateralized, and it's something that, as I have learned over the years, is not an acceptable position for a town to have their funds uncollateralized. So when I look back at what I did, I still feel it was the right thing that I did. What I didn't do was communicate to, I did communicate to Claudette. I didn't ever make it a public communication that I should have done, perhaps. But, you know, I don't do these things without discussing things with others. And so I didn't get anybody saying to me, okay, Cheryl, don't forget, when we do this, we've got to go back to the select board and put it in front of them. That wasn't, you know, Herb and I didn't have that conversation. And when I shared it with Claudette, at least I know, it didn't pop into my head. I'm sorry.
And Claudette shared.
I'm struggling with this. I mean, you know, to your considerable credit, which was credited to you many times publicly, you know, when the email scam happened, you were all over these internal rules. You have more experience with these internal rules than anyone in our town. And you know, Claudette, I would have the question for you. What gave you the impression that you have the authority simply as board chair with no decision-making authority resting in that title other than setting an agenda? What made you think that you were able to approve this and sanction it?
John, I did not approve and sanction, and I brought it to the board. It was brought to the full board.
So you mean like right now?
In an executive session.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not remembering this conversation, but Roger's nodding, so clearly it was. I mean, you know, the idea of moving $3 million and then assuming that retroactively that would be approved. I mean, this is this shows that something dramatic and catastrophic could happen if the wrong person was sitting in this position.
Well, again, John, you have your opinion. I understand. I didn't move any money out of the bank. I mean, that money stayed with an account at Mascoma, and I worked with Mascoma to figure out a way to protect it. I had those conversations with Herb. This was not done without lengthy conversations, because I also recall that I was leaving town and I took the time to protect the funds before I left to get this ICS account opened to do what I thought was the right thing. It wasn't done totally on my own. It was a collaboration that I had with Herb.
and
Only
brought to
the point-
Claudette's attention after the fact, who then Claudette subsequently brought to the board.
I don't recall, this feels like a gray area because then we're talking about something. Oh God.
The last
So
recommendation
I was aware of the we were all aware of the collateralization issue, and we were aware of how Herb sought to address it. And we were aware that our treasurer may or may not have been of the opinion that this was not properly addressed.
For sure.
But we, by consensus, were recognized that it was addressed, that Cheryl brought a concern to the town manager addressed it to the auditor, and there was some, one of the good questions that was had was, can you ask the auditor who will then audit you these kinds of questions? Like, all of that was like thoughtfully discussed. At no time were we made aware that an action was taken. And so I believe that while we're aware of the issue, it's disingenuous to suggest that the board, gave their thumbs up informally or anecdotally to this process. And so I think for me, do we disagree? I don't, I think, at our December 9th meeting or the next opportunity we have, the suggestions for additional internal controls that are brought forward, if we all agree and co-sign it, then we should just move on, because I think that this wasn't a matter of policy. I think this was a matter of a communication issue and ongoing development of interpersonal relationships, which, take efforts. And so that's my analysis. And if we all, including the treasurer, agree with the recommendations of the new internal controls, I think we should adopt them at a future meeting and move on. With respect and thanks to everyone. That's my opinion.
That works for me. Any other board questions? Seeing none, hearing none, then we will do as Roger proposed, and this will come before the December 19th, not 19th, December 9th meeting, once we've had a chance to look at the material that Herb sent us today. Any further comments? Mary?
I'm still digesting this information. I'm wondering how, in the absence of not fulfilling our policies, how would we know whether they're being fulfilled or not? Like, I mean, how did this?
Well, it takes someone picking it up.
Exactly.
So.
It's just a question, because I don't, we don't supervise the treasurer. It's not our job. But someone has to know about it. I mean, it seems a little bit as if there's a gap.
Which I believe Herb is trying to address.
Yeah, trying to address. I agree. I think it's a good effort, and I do agree with Roger that we should move forward, try to strengthen our internal controls, and just see if we can none of this happen again.
Any other comments?
So I guess, just to think about it, I hope in the regards to it, and I would like to see what Herb has proposed, that we're more careful about keeping our collateralization at our balances at the limits and moving the funds to the school district, on a basis that allows us to stay within our collateralization limit, which now has been raised to $9 million, just as a guidance to the board.
I don't see how it got so out of whack. I mean, because, for years and years and years, we've made the transfer of funds to the school district. So that part I don't really understand why it suddenly is a problem of collateralization. It's not as if the school budget itself went up by millions of dollars. So, and, you know, that's fine.
Yeah, I would say staffing in a global pandemic, in short.
And I would say that's a whole separate
That's a
conversation.
whole separate thing. Okay, I'm gonna let it go.
All right. So if we're done, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move
Only to be back here tomorrow night. Yay.
I
Is there a
move we
second to the motion?
Second.
Mary moved, John seconded to adjourn. Roger,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
and Claudette's a yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Tomorrow.